Hi everyone and welcome back. This is the final unit of this course, and in this unit we're going to learn vocabulary related to entertainment and the internet. And in this lesson we're going to focus on TV shows. The first word is something we learned in the first vocabulary builder course, and this is the television. A television in Korean is television. Television. So we just say television phonetically in Korean. Quite often, we just call it TV. TV. Let's practice saying this word. Television. Television. That was great. The next word is the viewer, people watching TV, and they are called 시청자. 시청자. In this word, 시 refers to sight and 청 refers to hearing. And for this reason, your sense of sight is called 시각, 시각, and your sense of hearing is called 청각, 청각. Together, 시청 as a noun refers to the act of watching and listening to TV, and 시청률 refers to TV rating. The final syllable 자 means a person, so 시청자 is someone watching and listening to TV, a TV viewer. Let's practice saying this word. 시청자. 시청자. That was great. The next word is the verb to watch TV, and this is 시청하다. 시청하다. In everyday conversation, to talk about watching TV, we generally use the verb 보다 with 텔레비전. So we say 텔레비전을 보다. And we generally don't use 시청하다 to talk about ourselves watching TV. 시청하다 is more formal, so it's more often used in formal contexts and also to refer to watching TV in a more general sense. So if a TV show was about to finish and the host wanted to ask the viewers to tune in next week, the host might say, 다음 주에도 시청해 주세요. Please watch us next week also. 다음 주에도 시청해 주세요. And if the news reported that record numbers watched a drama show, they would use the verb 시청하다. Okay, so with that in mind, let's now practice this word, 시청하다. Repeat after me. 시청하다. 시청하다. Excellent job, well done. Next, let's take a look at a couple of words we use to refer to entertainment shows. First, in Korea, there are a lot of TV entertainment shows where you have a bunch of celebrities, and the main purpose of the show is for the celebrities to entertain the TV viewers. So they're just entertainment shows. And these shows are called 예능 프로그램. 예능 프로그램. In everyday speech, these shows are referred to as just 예능. And some examples include TV shows like Running Man, 1박 2일, and my personal favorite, 무한도전. And even those shows with babies in them like 슈퍼맨이 돌아왔다 are regarded as 예능. Now at this point, it's important to point out that the word 예능 actually means artistic ability. The syllable 예 refers to arts and 능 means ability. So 예능 means artistic ability. However, nowadays, 예능 is more often used to refer to TV entertainment shows. Let's practice saying this name of a TV show. 예능 프로그램. 예능 프로그램. Excellent job, well done. The next word we have is a talk show, and a talk show in Korean is 토크쇼. 토크쇼. So we just say the name phonetically in Korean. And a good example of a Korean talkshow is 비정상회담, which roughly translates to an unusual summit meeting. And it's a play on word because a summit meeting, such as a UN summit meeting, is called 정상회담. And this show is about different foreign nationals in Korea coming together to talk about different cultures. So they call the show 비정상회담. And if you search on YouTube, you can find clips of this show, and it's quite interesting as you can see a lot of foreigners speaking fluent Korean. Now, when we say this word, the 시옷 in 쇼 is pronounced as a tense consonant. So it's 토크쇼, 토크쇼. Let's say that together. 토크쇼. 토크쇼. Great job, well done. Let's now look at words we use to refer to people on 예능 프로그램. First, we have the host, and this is 진행자. 진행자. 진행 is a noun that means progress, and as we have seen already, 자 is a suffix meaning a person. So 진행자 is someone who makes the show progress, a host. In Korean, we also refer to a host as an MC. And in terms of pronunciation, the 니은 받침 in 진 carries over. So this is 진행자. 진행자. Let's say this word together. 진행자. 진행자. That was great. Next, we have the word for a celebrity, and this is 연예인. 연예인. In this word, 연예 means entertainment, and 인 means a person. So 연예인 kind of means an entertainer, but it's generally used to mean a celebrity in Korean. In this word, the vowel 예 weakens, so it's pronounced like 에. So it's 연예인. 연예인. Let's say this word together. 연예인. 연예인. Great job. The next word is a comedian, and this is 코미디언. 코미디언. So we just say the English word phonetically in Korean. Sometimes to refer to a comedian, we say 개그맨. 개그맨. And this is a type of Konglish, as 개그 comes from the English word gag, and men comes from man. So 개그맨 is a gag man, a comedian. Now, both of these words are very common, but in this lesson, we'll focus on practicing the word comedian. Repeat after me. Comedian. Comedian. Excellent job, well done. The final word in this lesson is a name we use to refer to people on entertainment shows, 예능, and they are called 예능인. 예능인. Now, although 예능 means artistic ability, because this word is generally used to refer to specific entertainment shows in Korean, we use 예능인 to refer to people who are on these types of shows regularly. Now, if you're familiar with these types of shows, some examples of 예능인 would be 유재석, 하하, and Kim Jong-kook. And all three men are on the program called Running Men. Let's practice this word, 예능인. 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 Fantastic job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned that television is a television and is often called TV. 시청자 is a TV viewer, and the verb 시청하다 is a formal form of the verb to watch TV. 예능 프로그램 refers to entertainment shows, and they're often referred to as just 예능. 토크쇼 is a talk show. 진행자 is a host of a TV show. 연예인 is a celebrity, and comedian is a comedian. And we also refer to comedians as 개그맨. Lastly, 예능인 is an entertainer. People on 예능 프로그램. Okay, so that's it for another lesson. And as always, the review lesson is next. I look forward to seeing you soon again. Bye-bye. 텔레비전, 텔레비전. 시청자, 시청자. 시청하다, 시청하다. 예능 프로그램, 예능 프로그램. 토크쇼, 토크쇼. 진행자, 진행자. 연예인, 연예인. 코미디언, 코미디언. 예능인, 예능인. 텔레비전, 텔레비전. 시청자, 시청자. 시청하다, 시청하다. 예능 프로그램, 예능 프로그램. 텔레비전, 텔레비전. 토크쇼, 토크쇼. 진행자, 진행자. 시청자, 시청자. 시청하다, 시청하다. 연예인, 연예인. 코미디언, 코미디언. 예능인, 예능인. 예능 프로그램, 예능 프로그램. 진행자, 진행자. 코미디언, 코미디언. 예능인, 예능인. 토크쇼, 토크쇼. 연예인, 연예인. Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to learn vocabulary related to drama and music. The first word is the word for drama, and you may know this word already. This is 드라마, 드라마. So we just say drama phonetically in Korean. In Korea, dramas are quite often on TV for 2 consecutive days a week. So a drama series might be on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, or Friday and Saturday. And when we refer to a particular drama series on certain days, we say the syllables that refer to those particular days and add the word 드라마. So dramas on Monday and Tuesday are called 월화 드라마, 월화 드라마. And 월화 refers to Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday dramas are called 수목 드라마, 수목 드라마. And Friday and Saturday dramas are called 금토 드라마, 금토 드라마. The only exception is a drama series on Saturday and Sunday, as these are referred to as a weekend drama, 주말 드라마. And my favorite drama series, Itaewon Class, was on Friday and Saturday, so it was referred to as 금토 드라마, 금토 드라마. And if a rating for a drama is the best for those particular days, they will say that that drama is the most popular among 금토 드라마. So let's practice this word, 드라마. Repeat after me. 드라마, 드라마. Let's say Friday and Saturday drama, 금토 드라마, 금토 드라마. Repeat after me. 금토 드라마, 금토 드라마. Excellent job, well done. The next word is a sitcom, and this is just sitcom, sitcom. So we just say it phonetically in Korean, but 시옷 in 시 is pronounced as a 쌍시옷. So it's sitcom, sitcom. Let's say that together. Sitcom, sitcom. That was great. The next word is a play, and this is 연극, 연극. In this word, 연 means perform and 극 means drama. And together, 연극 means a play. When we say this word, the 니은 받침 in 연 is pronounced as an 이응 sound. So it's 연극, 연극. Let's say that together. 연극, 연극. Great job, well done. Okay, then we have two words we use to refer to actors and actresses in Korea. First, to refer to actors and actresses in general, we say 배우, 배우. In this word, both syllables 배 and 우 mean a person who acts. And we use 배우 to refer to actors and actresses in movies, dramas, and even theatre plays. However, we can also be more specific about what kind of actor or actress someone is. So to refer to actors and actresses in theatre plays, we say 연극 배우, 연극 배우. And to refer to musical actors and actresses, we say 뮤지컬 배우, 뮤지컬 배우. Now, there is another word we use to refer to actors and actresses, and that's 연기자, 연기자. 연기 is a noun and it means acting, and 자 means a person. So 연기자 is someone who acts, and it has the same meaning as 배우. However, we generally don't say 연극 연기자 or 뮤지컬 연기자. 연기자 is usually used on its own. Okay, so let's practice this word 배우 together. 배우, 배우. That was great, well done. Now, in Korean, when we refer to actors and actresses in TV dramas, we can use another word, and this is 탤런트, 탤런트. Now, this is a very good example of a Konglish word, an English word which is used entirely different way in Korean. This word 탤런트 comes from the English word talent, but I'm not sure why we use this word to refer to actors and actresses on TV in Korean. Let's practice this word 탤런트. Repeat after me. 탤런트, 탤런트. Excellent job. Now, in Korean, to refer to drama or film directors, we say 감독, 감독. In this word, both 감 and 독 means to control or supervise. And although we use 감독 to refer to film directors, we also use it to refer to coaches and managers of sports teams. So if we want to specifically refer to film or drama directors, we might say 영화 감독 and 드라마 감독. And to refer to a manager or a coach of a baseball team, we can say 야구 감독, 야구 감독. Let's practice this word 감독. Repeat after me. 감독, 감독. Great job, well done. Let's now look at some words related to music. And the first word is a musician, and this is 음악가, 음악가. In this word, 음악 is music. Refers to note, tone, and 악 refers to music. And 가, as we learned before, refers to an expert. So 음악가 is an expert in music. Sometimes we also refer to musician as musician, and this term is also quite common. And in terms of pronunciation, the 미음 받침 in carries over, and 기역 받침 in 악 is silent. And 기역 in 가 is pronounced as a tense consonant. So this is 음악가, 음악가. Let's practice saying this word. 음악가, 음악가. That was great. The next word is a singer, and this is 가수, 가수. Now, if you recall, we mentioned that 국가 is a formal word for country, but it also means national anthem. And the syllable ka means song or sing. And 수 is another word that we use to refer to someone who's skilled at something. So 가수 means a skilled singer. Let's practice saying this word. 가수, 가수. Great job. The next word is a form of Konglish, and this is what we use to refer to popular young singers in Korea. And this is idol, idol. This word comes from the English word idol, and we generally use this word to refer to young singers, most often singers in groups, who are popular among young people. So singers like Lee Jeok or Park Jong-hyun wouldn't be idol, as they're not young and they tend to be more popular among older Koreans. But groups like BTS and EXO are idols. And sometimes they're referred to as idol 가수, idol 가수. Let's practice saying this word, idol. Repeat after me. idol, idol. Excellent job, well done. The final two words are related, and they are boy group and girl group. And these words are said phonetically in Korean. So they are 걸그룹, 걸그룹, 보이그룹, 보이그룹. Sometimes they're referred to as 아이돌 걸그룹 and 아이돌 보이그룹. Let's practice saying the shortened phrase together. 걸그룹, 걸그룹. 보이그룹, 보이그룹. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned that 드라마 is drama, sitcom is sitcom, and 연극 is play. 배우 is an actor or actress, but we also say 연기자. 탤런트 refers to TV actors and actresses. And 감독 is a director in movies and dramas, but we also use this word to refer to coaches and managers of sports teams. 음악가 is a musician, 가수 is a singer, and idol refers to young singers who are popular among young fans. And lastly, 걸그룹 is a girl group and 보이그룹 is a boy group. That's it for another lesson, and as always, do make sure to take the review lesson to test what you learned in this lesson. See you soon again. Bye-bye. 드라마, 드라마. 시트콤, 시트콤. 연극, 연극. 배우, 배우. 탤런트, 탤런트. 감독, 감독. 음악가, 음악가. 가수, 가수. 아이돌, 아이돌. 걸그룹, 걸그룹. 보이그룹, 보이그룹. 드라마, 드라마. 시트콤, 시트콤. 연극, 연극. 배우, 배우. 드라마, 드라마. 탤런트, 탤런트. 감독, 감독. 시트콤, 시트콤. 음악가, 음악가. 가수, 가수. 연극, 연극. 아이돌, 아이돌. 걸그룹, 걸그룹. 배우, 배우. 보이그룹, 보이그룹. 탤런트, 탤런트. 음악가, 음악가. 보이그룹, 보이그룹. 아이돌, 아이돌. 감독, 감독. 걸그룹, 걸그룹. 가수, 가수. Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to learn words related to films, movies. And first up is the word for a film, and this is 영화, 영화. Now, when we say this word in natural speed, here in 화 is almost silent. So it's 영화, 영화. Let's say that together. 영화, 영화. Now, to say a film is released, we say 영화가 개봉하다. 영화가 개봉하다. The verb 개봉하다 means for a film to release or to be released. And the noun 개봉 can mean a new release, but it can also be used in a general sense to talk about opening something that is sealed. When we say this word 개봉하다, here in 하 is barely audible, so it's 개봉하다. 개봉하다. Let's practice saying this sentence. A film is released. 영화가 개봉하다. Repeat after me. 영화가 개봉하다. 영화가 개봉하다. Great job. Next, we have the word for the cinema, a movie theater, and this is 극장. 극장. In this word, 극 means drama and 장 can mean a stage. And 극장 can refer to cinemas where they show films, but it can also refer to theaters where they show plays and musicals. We can also refer to cinemas and movie theaters as 영화관, 영화관. And in this word, 관 means a building. So 영화관 is a more specific word that refers to movie theaters. When we say this word 극장, 지읒 in 장 is pronounced as a tense consonant. So it's 극장, 극장. Let's say that together. 극장, 극장. That was great. Well done. The next word we have is a verb, and this is a very specific verb we use to talk about showing movies at cinemas. And this is 상영하다, 상영하다. Let's say that together. 상영하다, 상영하다. Let's say to show a film at the cinema. 극장에서 상영하다, 극장에서 상영하다. Repeat after me. 극장에서 상영하다, 극장에서 상영하다. Great job, well done. The next word is audience, someone who goes to watch films, and this is 관객, 관객. 관객 is a general word for audience, so you can use this word to refer to someone who goes to plays, TV shows, musicals, concerts, sporting events, and cinemas to watch films. When you say this word, the 니은 받침 is pronounced as an 이응 sound, so it's 관객, 관객. Let's say that together. 관객, 관객. That was great. The next word is the word for genre, and this is phonetically said in Korean, and it's 장르, 장르. Let's say that together. 장르, 장르. That was great. Well done. Now, we're going to learn movie genre words, but we're not going to cover words that are the same in English, and these include action, action, 스릴러 for thriller, 코미디 for comedy, and 로맨스 for romantic. So we're mainly going to focus on words that are different from English. And first up is my favorite genre, and that's horror. Horror in Korean is 공포, 공포. Both syllables 공 and 포 refer to fear and terror. And this is what we use to refer to horror. Let's say this word together. 공포, 공포. Let's say a horror film. 공포 영화, 공포 영화. Repeat after me. 공포 영화, 공포 영화. That was great. Next, we have the word for crime, and we went over this word in our first vocabulary builder course, and this is 범죄, 범죄. 범죄 literally means a crime, and when you say this word naturally, the vowel 왜 in 죄 weakens. So it sounds like 에. So it's 범죄, 범죄. Let's say this word together. 범죄, 범죄. Let's say a crime film. 범죄 영화, 범죄 영화. Let's say that together. 범죄 영화, 범죄 영화. Excellent job. The next film genre is war, and this is 전쟁, 전쟁. 전쟁 literally means a war. So the Korean War, which started on June 25th, is referred to as 6.25 전쟁. 6.25 전쟁. 6.25 referring to June 25th. Let's say this word 전쟁 together. 전쟁, 전쟁. Let's say a war film. 전쟁 영화, 전쟁 영화. Repeat after me. 전쟁 영화, 전쟁 영화. Great job. The final word is the word for a biopic, and this is 전기, 전기. Earlier, we learned that electricity is 전기, but 전기 can also mean a biography. When we say this word, 니은 받침 in 전 is pronounced as an 이응 sound, so it's 전기, 전기. Let's say that together. 전기, 전기. Let's say a biopic film. 전기 영화, 전기 영화. Repeat after me. 전기 영화, 전기 영화. Fantastic job today. Well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned that 영화 is a film, a movie. 개봉하다 means for a film to be released or to release a film. 극장 is the cinema, but it's also used to refer to theaters where they play plays and musicals. And another word we use to refer to cinemas and movie theaters is 영화관. 상영하다 means to show a film at the cinema. 관객 is audience, a moviegoer. 장르 is genre, and then we had 4 words related to movie genre. 공포 is horror, 범죄 is crime, 전쟁 is war, and lastly, 정기 is biopic. Okay, so that's the end of another lesson, and I look forward to seeing you soon again in the next lesson. Bye bye. 영화, 영화. 개봉하다, 개봉하다. 극장, 극장. 상영하다, 상영하다. 관객, 관객. 장르, 장르. 공포, 공포. 범죄, 범죄. 전쟁, 전쟁. 정기, 정기. 영화, 영화. 개봉하다, 개봉하다. 극장, 극장. 상영하다, 상영하다. 영화, 영화. 관객, 관객. 개봉하다, 개봉하다. 장르, 장르. 공포, 공포. 극장, 극장. 상영하다, 상영하다. 범죄, 범죄. 전쟁, 전쟁. 관객, 관객. 정기, 정기. 공포, 공포. 장르, 장르. 전쟁, 전쟁. 정기, 정기. 범죄, 범죄. Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to learn words related to social media. And the first word is social media. In Korean, we have a rather unusual word for this, and this is SNS. SNS. So in Korean, we refer to social media using initials SNS, and just say it phonetically in Korean. These initials are social networking service, and while other English-speaking countries refer to sites like Facebook and Instagram as social media, in Korea we use SNS, but say it phonetically in Korean, SNS. Let's practice saying this phrase. SNS. SNS. That was great. Let's now learn how we say different SNS sites. First, we have Facebook, and we just say this phonetically in Korean. So it's Facebook, Facebook. Quite often, particularly among young people, it's referred to as Pebook, Pebook. Let's practice both the long form and the shortened form. Facebook, Facebook. Pebook, Pebook. Great job, well done. The next social media site is Twitter, and this is Twitter, Twitter. The noun tweet is tweet, and the verb to tweet is tweet하다, tweet하다. Let's practice this word, Twitter. Repeat after me. Twitter, Twitter. That was great, well done. The next word is Instagram, and in Korean, this is just Instagram, Instagram. In everyday conversation, however, nobody says the full name, and it's generally known as Insta, Insta. A more informal name is 임별, 임별. And this is because the word star, star in Korean is 별. So some people refer to it as 임별, 임별. Let's practice saying Insta together. Insta, Insta. That was great, well done. Now, one social media we're going to skip over is Snapchat, but if you're wondering what this is called in Korean, it's Snapchat, Snapchat. Now, the next word we have is the messaging app, and it's the most popular one and pretty much the only messaging app Koreans use, and it's KakaoTalk, and this is KakaoTalk, KakaoTalk. However, similar to Instagram, nobody calls it KakaoTalk, and it's generally referred to as 카톡, 카톡. Also, we can use it as a verb. So, 카톡하다, 카톡하다 means to send a KakaoTalk message, and the message itself is also referred to as 카톡 or just talk, though referring to KakaoTalk message as talk is very casual. Let's practice saying 카톡 together. Repeat after me. 카톡, 카톡. That was great. The next word is a post, as in a social media post, and this is 게시물, 게시물. 게시 is a noun that means posting, as in a post on notice boards to let many people know something. And the verb 게시하다 means to post something. However, in Korean, when we talk about social media posts, we say 게시물. And the syllable 물 means an object or thing. So 게시물 kind of means posting object. And it refers to different kinds of photos and videos that we post on social media. Quite often, however, social media posts are also referred to as posting, posting. And this word is also quite common. And we often use the words 게시물 and posting with the verb 올리다, which means to upload. So to say, I put up a post on Instagram, we can say, 저는 인스타에 게시물을 올렸어요. 저는 인스타에 게시물을 올렸어요. Let's first practice saying this word, 게시물. Repeat after me. 게시물, 게시물. Let's now practice saying to put up a post on Instagram. 인스타에 게시물을 올리다. 인스타에 게시물을 올리다. Excellent job, well done. The next word is like, as in to like a post, or the like button on social media. In Korea, this is always treated as a noun, so a like in Korean is 좋아요. 좋아요. 좋아요 is the polite form of the descriptive verb 좋다, which means to be good. And in Korean, we use various verbs with this noun 좋아요 to form different expressions. For example, to like a post is 좋아요 하다, 좋아요 하다. To press like is 좋아요를 누르다, 좋아요를 누르다. And to unlike is 좋아요를 취소하다, 좋아요를 취소하다. And in these expressions, 하다 means to do, 누르다 means to press, and 취소하다 is to cancel. Let's first practice like. Repeat after me. 좋아요. 좋아요. Let's say to like a post. 좋아요 하다. 좋아요 하다. Let's say to press like. 좋아요를 누르다. 좋아요를 누르다. Lastly, let's say to unlike. 좋아요를 취소하다. 좋아요를 취소하다. Excellent job, well done. The next word is to follow, and this is follow하다. follow하다. Now, there is another word that means follow in Korean, but when we're talking about following someone on social media, we say follow하다. And a follower in Korean is follower, follower. Let's say this verb follow하다. Repeat after me. follow하다. follow하다. Great job! The final word in this lesson is an online comment, and this is 댓글. 댓글. 대 means to respond, and 글 means writing. And in Korean, online comments are regarded as a writing in response to something. So 댓글 actually means a comment in response. And as we have seen in many other examples before, in certain compound nouns, we add 시옷 받침 to the end of the first noun. So we add 시옷 받침 to 대. Also, when we say this word, 시옷 받침 is silent and 기역 in 글 is pronounced as a tense consonant. So this is pronounced 댓글, 댓글. Let's say this word together. 댓글, 댓글. Excellent job today. Okay, so today we learned that SNS refers to social media. Facebook is Facebook, but it's commonly referred to as 페북. Twitter is Twitter. Insta is Instagram. KakaoTalk is KakaoTalk, but it's generally referred to as 카톡. 게시물 is a post on social media, and 게시물을 올리다 is to post something. 좋아요 is like, and we use various verbs such as 하다, 누르다, and 취소하다 to form different expressions related to like. follow하다 is to follow, and 댓글 is an online comment. Okay, so we're nearly coming towards the end of the course, but we have one final lesson left in this course. And I'll see you soon again in that lesson. Bye-bye. SNS, SNS. 페이스북, 페이스북. 트위터, 트위터. 인스타, 인스타. 카톡, 카톡. 게시물, 게시물. 게시물을 올리다. 게시물을 올리다. 좋아요. 좋아요. 팔로우하다. 팔로우하다. 댓글. 댓글. SNS. SNS. 페이스북. 페이스북. 트위터. 트위터. 인스타. 인스타. SNS. SNS. 카톡. 카톡. 게시물. 게시물. 페이스북. 페이스북. 게시물을 올리다. 게시물을 올리다. 좋아요. 좋아요. 트위터. 트위터. 팔로우하다. 팔로우하다. 인스타. 인스타. 댓글. 댓글. 카톡. 카톡. 게시물을 올리다. 게시물을 올리다. 좋아요. 좋아요. 댓글. 댓글. 게시물. 게시물. 팔로우하다. 팔로우하다. Hi everyone and welcome to the final lesson of this course. In this lesson, we're going to learn language related to the internet. And the first word is the internet. And this is just said phonetically in Korean. So it's internet. Internet. It's a pretty simple word, so let's practice this right away. Internet. Internet. Excellent job. The next word is to be online. In English, to say that you're doing things on the internet, we generally say I'm on the internet. But in Korean, we say 인터넷을 하다. 인터넷을 하다. The verb 하다 means to do. So this phrase means to do the internet. So if I want to say I'm on the internet, I can say 저는 인터넷을 해요. 저는 인터넷을 해요. Let's practice saying to be online, 인터넷을 하다. Repeat after me. 인터넷을 하다. 인터넷을 하다. That was excellent. Well done. The next word is a website. And in Korean, we can say this word phonetically in Korean. So we can say website. Website. However, there is a Konglish word we use to refer to websites, and that's homepage. Homepage. Now, clearly the words homepage and website are not entirely unrelated. But in English, a homepage is the main landing page of a website. However, in Korean, we use homepage to refer to the website as a whole. So let's say this word homepage to refer to websites. Repeat after me. homepage. homepage. That was great. The next word is an email, and this is said phonetically in Korean. So it's email. email. Let's say this word together. email. email. Let's say to send an email. 이메일을 보내다. 이메일을 보내다. Repeat after me. 이메일을 보내다. 이메일을 보내다. Great job. The next word is the verb to log in, and this is 로그인 하다. 로그인 하다. So we add 하다 to the word 로그인 to form a verb. Let's say this word together. 로그인 하다. 로그인 하다. That was great. The next word is an account for when we say things like a Google account or a Facebook account. And this is 계정. 계정. In this word, 개 means to calculate and 정 means to determine or decide. And together, 계정 means an account. And we use this word 계정 to refer to accounts we have with various online websites, such as social media websites or shopping websites. To refer to bank accounts, we use another word, which is 계좌. In terms of pronunciation, the vowel 예 in the first syllable weakens, so it's pronounced like 에. So this is 계정, 계정. Let's practice saying this word. 계정, 계정. Great job. The next word is a username, and this is 사용자명, 사용자명. 사용자 means a user, and 명 means name. So this literally means a username in Korean. However, this word is quite formal and is rarely used in everyday speech. When people talk to each other about each other's username, they don't use this word, and instead they say ID, ID. ID comes from the English word ID, and in everyday conversation, we use this word to refer to people's usernames. Let's practice saying this common word for username, ID. Repeat after me. ID. ID. Great job, well done. The next word is a password, and this is 비밀번호. 비밀번호. In this word, 비밀 means secret and 번호 means number. So together it means a secret number. And this is the Korean word for a password. Sometimes Koreans will say password phonetically in Korean and say 패스워드. And this word is also quite common in everyday speech. In terms of pronunciation, the 니은 받침 in 번 carries over. So this is pronounced 비밀번호. 비밀번호. Let's practice saying this word. 비밀번호. 비밀번호. Fantastic job, well done. The final two words are related to online shopping. And the first word is online shopping. And this is online shopping. Online shopping. Let's say this word together. Online shopping. Online shopping. That was great. The final word is a basket or a cart where you put the things you want to buy when you're doing online shopping. And in Korean, this is 장바구니. 장바구니. In this word, 장 means shopping, and we commonly use this word to refer to grocery shopping. And 바구니 means a basket. So 장바구니 means a shopping basket. And we use this word to refer to baskets we use at supermarkets. However, baskets on online shopping websites are also referred to as 장바구니. And when we say this word, 비읍 in 파 is pronounced as a tense consonant. So it's 장바구니, 장바구니. Let's say this word together. 장바구니, 장바구니. fantastic job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned that internet is the internet. 인터넷을 하다 means to be online. 홈페이지 is a website, but we can also say website. Email is an email. 로그인 하다 is to log in. 계정 is an account, but specifically to accounts we have with online websites. ID is a username, but a more formal word is 사용자명. 비밀번호 is password, but we can also just say 패스워드. Online shopping is online shopping. And lastly, 장바구니 is basket. Okay, so that's the final lesson of this course. But as always, we have a review lesson to come. But I'll see you one last time in the final farewell video. See you then. Bye-bye. 인터넷, 인터넷. 인터넷을 하다, 인터넷을 하다. 홈페이지, 홈페이지. 이메일, 이메일. 로그인 하다, 로그인 하다. 계정, 계정. 아이디, 아이디. 비밀번호, 비밀번호. 온라인 쇼핑, 온라인 쇼핑. 장바구니, 장바구니. 인터넷, 인터넷. 인터넷을 하다, 인터넷을 하다. 홈페이지, 홈페이지. 이메일, 이메일. 인터넷, 인터넷. 로그인 하다, 로그인 하다. 계정, 계정. 인터넷을 하다, 인터넷을 하다. 홈페이지, 홈페이지. 아이디, 아이디. 비밀번호, 비밀번호. 이메일, 이메일. 온라인 쇼핑, 온라인 쇼핑. 로그인 하다, 로그인 하다. 장바구니, 장바구니. ID, ID. 비밀번호, 비밀번호. 장바구니, 장바구니. 온라인 쇼핑, 온라인 쇼핑. 계정, 계정. Hi everyone, my name is Kim Gi-hwan and welcome to my course on learning about formal language in Korean. Now, Korea is a highly hierarchical society. So whenever Korean people meet, they instantly form a hierarchy. So some people become our peers, some people become our superiors, and some are below us in the hierarchy. And depending on who we're speaking to, it's important to use appropriate and respectful language, particularly when we're speaking to those who are higher up in the hierarchy. So in this course, we'll learn how hierarchies are established in different contexts, such as in families, at work, and at school. And we'll also learn the important role age plays in establishing hierarchy in Korea, and how Korea uses a different age system. We'll learn what formal and honorific language is, and how they are used in different situations with different people. We'll then look at different kinds of honorific nouns and verbs, as well as how verbs are conjugated into honorific forms. We'll also learn how we can address our friends, as well as those who are higher than us in the hierarchy. Finally, we'll learn how we can be respectful when using Korean in specific settings, such as when we're saying goodnight, when we talk about meeting people, and when we talk about taking someone to a particular place. By the end of this course, the aim is for you to have a clear idea of how you can speak Korean with your friends, as well as those who are higher up in the hierarchy. All our lessons on honorific language in context include series of guided speaking practices, and each lesson comes with worksheets so that you can review what you learned in the lessons. Now, this course is not for absolute beginners, so you do need to have a working knowledge of Hangul and basic awareness of Korean sentence structure. Okay, so if you're keen to master how formal language is used in Korea, come and join the course. I'll see you soon in the lesson. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, in this lecture I'm going to explain how this course is structured so that you have a better idea of how to navigate this course and so that you have a better understanding of how your learning is going to be structured. So let's go over the 3 core units of this course. The following unit, Unit 2, is on hierarchy in Korea. In this unit, we'll first briefly go over what formal language is in Korean and how we use language with people in different levels of hierarchy. Then we'll take a look at how hierarchy is established in different settings. And although the most important element in establishing hierarchy is age, in certain settings, such as in families, at work, and at school, there are other factors that come into play. So we'll take a look at all these different factors in detail. Unit 3 is on honorific language, and in this unit we'll learn more about different kinds of honorific language. Now there are specific honorific nouns and verbs which are different from their standard forms. So we'll take a look at these in detail, and there will also be a handout with a comprehensive list of honorific nouns and verbs, which you can review in your own time. After that, we will learn how to conjugate verbs into honorific forms. Not all verbs have separate honorific forms. Some can be conjugated into honorific forms by adding she, and we'll take a look through different patterns of verb conjugation in detail. Finally, in this unit, we will learn how to address our peers and how to address those higher than us in the hierarchy. In Unit 4, we'll look at how we use language in different situations with different people. We'll learn about honorific language used to talk about asking questions, giving something to someone, and taking someone to a particular place. And by going over how language is used in different settings, it'll help to improve your overall understanding of how honorific language is used in Korea. Each lesson is accompanied with worksheets, so please download the worksheets so that you can review what you learned and practice writing the sentences from the lesson. Okay, so that's the overview of the whole course, and the next lesson is the first lesson on the unit on hierarchy in Korea. And we'll first take a look at what formal language is. I'll see you soon in that lesson. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, so in this unit we're going to go over what formal language is in Korean, and we're also going to learn various cultural aspects which affects how and why we use formal and informal language in Korea. Now, Korean language can be categorized into either 반말, which means informal, or 존댓말, which means formal/respectful. 반 means half, and 말 means words or speech. So the literal meaning of 반말 doesn't make much sense. But 반말 refers to language we use with those who are of equal standing, or when we can talk down to people, particularly to those who are younger than us. On the other hand, in 존댓말, 존댓 comes from the word 존대, which means respect. So this phrase 존댓말 refers to language we use to be respectful. The words 반 and 존대 come from Chinese characters, and there are equivalent native Korean phrases which are 낮춤말 and 높임말. 낮춤 comes from the word 낮추다, which means to lower, and 높임 comes from the word 높이다, which means to elevate. However, these phrases are less commonly used than 반말 and 존댓말. So the important question we need to consider is why we have these two types of language. And the reason why we have 반말 and 존댓말 is because of the Korean culture, which is heavily influenced by Confucianism. Now, we won't go into Confucianism in too much detail, but one of the key tenets of Confucianism is respect for age and authority. And to this day, it's an integral part of Korean society and culture. Now, the influence of Confucianism has led to the Korean society becoming highly hierarchical. Those who are older than us and those in position of authority, such as teachers and supervisors at work, are higher up in the hierarchy. And when we are with people with seniority, we have to use appropriate language, and we also have to behave appropriately. For example, in Korea, young people are not allowed to smoke cigarettes with older people. And if you want to have a cigarette when you're with older people, you have to excuse yourself and have a cigarette somewhere else. It's considered extremely rude to smoke together with people you should be respectful to. You can, however, smoke with people higher up in the hierarchy if they allow you to. These changes in our behavior, as well as the language we use, is incredibly important. If you don't keep to these social norms, then you're basically considered to be a very rude person, and it will be hard to maintain good relations with others. So the next important question is how this hierarchy is established. And there are different factors that come into play depending on the setting of the hierarchy, such as social, family, and workplace. However, the most important factor in establishing hierarchy in Korea is age. Now, age is the single most important factor, largely because it's one common denominator among all of us. But as we will find out in certain settings, such as workplace, one's position or role within that setting is more important than age. Now, we will explain how hierarchy is established in different settings, but before we do that, in the next lecture, we'll take a look at how age is calculated in Korea and how it's used to establish social hierarchy. So I'll see you soon again in the next lecture. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, so in this lesson, we're going to learn about the Korean age system. Now, it might seem a little strange, but age is calculated differently in Korea compared to other countries. And the age system used in Korea is referred to as East Asian age reckoning. This age system originated from China, and while many other East Asian countries such as Japan have abandoned the system, it's still the common age system used in Korea. This age system is based on two key factors. One is that as soon as you're born, you are a year old. And this is because this age system counts the time spent in the mother's womb, which is less than a full year, but it's roughly calculated as being 1 year. So once the baby is born, the baby instantly becomes a year old. The second important factor is that for the calendar year in which the baby is born, the baby is 1. And at the turn of the next year, the baby, as well as everyone else in Korea, becomes a year older. So regardless of when your birthday is, the whole population of Korea becomes a year older together in the new year. So this means that a baby born on December 31st is a year old for less than 24 hours and is then 2 on January 1st. And technically this will be correct, but when Koreans refer to baby's age, we tend to talk about their age in months rather than in years, which I think is quite similar in most other countries. So the two important points to note are 1, you are 1 when you are born, and 2, you become a year older at the turn of the following year. And this is the age system that determines social hierarchy in Korea. In Korea, those who are born in the same year as you are considered as your peers. Those who are older have seniority, and you have seniority over those who are younger than you. So if you were born in 1990, you need to be respectful towards those born in 1989 or earlier. And to those born in 1991 and later, you can be more casual as you are older than them. And the key thing to note is that even if they're only a month older than you, let's say that you were born in January and you meet someone born in December of the previous year, then you have to be respectful to that person born in the previous year, even though that person is only a month older. Because of this, in Korea, you can only be friends with those who are born in the same year as you, and you can never truly be friends with those who are older or younger, since you can never be equal in that relationship. Also, because of these reasons, quite often in Korea, rather than asking how old someone is, Koreans often ask each other what year they were born in. So if you were born in 1990, you can say 90년생. 90 refers to the year, 년 means year, and 생 means birth. When we say the year we're born in, we use Sino-Korean numbers. So do keep this in mind and don't be surprised if a Korean person asks what year you were born in, because they're trying to work out your age and where you fit in the social hierarchy. Now, one other key factor that influences how we use language in Korea is how familiar we are with certain people. If we have close relations with people, we can use more informal language, whereas if we aren't familiar with people, it's very important to use formal language. So I might know someone who's 5 years older than me, but because I've known that person my entire life, I will actually use 반말 with that person. Whereas if I meet someone who's only 2 years older than me, but I've only known that person for a month, then it's important for me to use 존댓말. Now, this aspect of familiarity and language use is something I will discuss in more detail later in this unit. Now, although the Korean age system is the main age system we use to establish social hierarchy, the Western age system is also used in Korea. It's mainly used to state certain age requirements, such as medical procedures where the patient has to be of a certain age, and also when referring to certain legal age requirements, such as for driving, drinking, and marriage. And to refer to this Western age, we use the word 만. So if we say 만 18살, then it means 18 years old in Western age. And if we say 만 16살, then it means 16 in Western age. So while Korean age system is the main age system that is used in everyday situation, and it's the one that we use to establish hierarchy when we meet people, when we need to be more precise, especially with certain legal age requirements, we use the Western age system. Okay, so I hope you now have a pretty good understanding of how Korean age system works and how it's used to establish social hierarchy in Korea. Over the next few lessons, we're going to look at how hierarchy is established in specific settings. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at hierarchy in schools. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi everyone. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how hierarchy is established at school. Now, although age is the most important factor in establishing social hierarchy, there are other factors that influence establishing hierarchy in other settings. Now, there are two key relationships at school. One is between the teacher and the student, and the other is between students. The relationship between teachers and students is simple to understand. Teachers are in the position of authority, so they have seniority. And in most settings, they are also older than the students. So this relationship is simple to understand. However, in educational settings with mature students, the teacher can be younger than the students, such as in yoga classes or at language schools. And in these settings, although the teacher has seniority, he or she has to be mindful and respectful of the fact that the students are older. And conversely, the students also have to be respectful of the teacher's position, even if they are younger. And in general, these relationships work out fine, but it is something people need to be mindful of. Now, in terms of the relationship between students, the hierarchy is established based on year groups, which is called 학년. And in primary and secondary schools, this is fairly straightforward as students tend to mix with their year group, and students in each year group tend to be of the same age. Those in year groups above are older and are called 선배, and those in year groups below are younger and are called 후배. The concept of 선배 and 후배 is really important in Korea. They're rather difficult to translate in English, but 선배 refers to someone with more experience than you, and 후배 is someone with less experience. The terms 선배 and 후배 are not limited in their use in school settings. They can also be used in other settings, such as at workplace. Now, students in the same year group in primary and secondary schools tend to use 반말 as soon as they meet. And they'll also use 반말 to their 후배 and use 존댓말 to their 선배. So hierarchy is fairly straightforward in primary and secondary schools. However, things get a little complicated when we start looking at year groups in universities. At universities in Korea, seniority is also based on year group, and the year group at university is called 학번. It's similar to the phrase class of in the US, but 학번 refers to the year you started university rather than the year you graduate in. So if you started university in 1998, then you are 98학번. And if you started university in 2008, then you are 08학번. We use Sino-Korean numbers and refer to the year by stating the numbers in single digits. Now, same as in primary and secondary schools, those who start the university before you have seniority, and they are called 선배. And you have seniority over those that start the university after you, who are called 후배. And those who are in your 학번 are called 동기. And 동기 refers to someone who begins something at the same time as you. And we can use 동기 in other settings, such as workplace. Now, most students in each 학번 tend to be of the same age. But for various reasons, there are some students who might be older. And one of the most common reasons is because some students retake the university entrance exam, which is called 수능. And they do this so that they can go to a better university. These students who retake 수능 are called 재수생. 재수 is the noun that refers to retaking 수능, and 생, as in 학생, refers to the student. So 재수생 means repeating student. When 재수생 enters university, they are generally in 학번, where most other students are a year younger. Nevertheless, they are the 재수생's 동기, so they are 재수생's friends. And those in 학번 from the previous year who are of the same age as 재수생 are 선배. So this has the potential of becoming a problem. 재수생 might find it difficult to be friends with those who are younger, or 재수생 might find it difficult to be respectful to those who are of the same age. And those 선배 who are well aware of the situation might get a bit abusive and upset the 재수생. And problems in relationships can occur time to time. When these situations arise, it requires the student to use a bit of common sense to ensure problems are avoided. And I think Korean students do try hard to make sure everyone feels comfortable in such situations. So do keep in mind that although age is the single most important factor in establishing hierarchy in Korea, in certain settings, such as at school, there are also other factors to consider, such as 학번. Okay, so let's now move on, and in the next lesson, we're going to look at how hierarchy is established in families. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to look at the hierarchy levels in families. Okay, so let's first take a look at this family tree chart. Now, in general, the level of hierarchy is quite easy to understand in families. The family hierarchy is exactly the way it's shown in this chart. Let's say that this is me, so this means that those above me are higher up in the hierarchy, and those below me are lower in the hierarchy. For those in the same level, such as my siblings and my cousins, the hierarchy is established through age, so it's fairly simple to understand. Now, when it comes to how we use 반말 and 존댓말 in families, it depends on a couple of key factors. First, it depends on the family culture. Every family has its own culture. Some families have a very conservative culture, and then there are families that are very progressive and easygoing. And the language used in these families can differ quite significantly. Also, another key factor with families is that unlike in other settings where you've only just met someone or you've known someone for a short time, families have known each other for a very long time, and in many cases, their entire lives. As such, in many families, it's not unusual for parents and their children to use 반말 to each other, or grandchildren to use 반말 with their grandparents. So the use of language can be more casual between family members. So overall, family hierarchy is simple to understand, and between family members, the language used can be quite casual, though it can depend on the family culture. However, one scenario in which this orderly hierarchy gets thrown into a bit of chaos is when someone gets married and a new family member joins. For example, let's imagine that I'm 35 years old and my younger sister is 32. Now, I marry someone who's 29 and my younger sister marries a man who's 38. Now, in this situation, the position of those new to the family is dependent on their partner's position. So my wife, who's 3 years younger than my sister, has seniority over her because she's married to me, who is higher up in the hierarchy than my sister. And I have seniority over my brother-in-law, even though he's 3 years older, because he's married to my younger sister. Now, in general, this is not a big issue, and the proper thing to do is to disregard the age difference and accept one's position in the family tree. However, depending on the people involved, this can lead to problems in people's relationships, and quite often Korean dramas play on this and show conflicts related to these situations, which I guess can make for a more entertaining storyline. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on hierarchy of relationships in families, which are quite simple to understand. And remember that language used in families is dependent on the hierarchy, closeness of family members, and the family culture. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the level of hierarchy in workplace. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi everyone. So in this lesson, we're going to look at the hierarchy levels in workplace. Now, the level of hierarchy at workplace is all about one's job title. There are some common job titles which are used in Korean corporate environments, and these are used uniformly in all Korean companies, though depending on the nature of the industry the company operates in, they may differ slightly. So these are 신입 사원, new employee, and 신입 means a newcomer and 사원 means an employee. Then we have 사원, employee. After that, you become 대리, which means an assistant manager. And next we have 과장, which means manager. After that, we have 차장 and 부장, and they are deputy head of department and head of department. This syllable 장 comes from Chinese and it refers to the head or the chief. Another title that's often used to refer to the head of department is 실장. Above that, we have 이사, which means director, and then we have 상무 and 전무. And they kind of refer to vice presidents, but they can also refer to other C-level type of roles, such as CFO or CTO. Lastly, we have 사장 and 회장, which refer to the CEO and the chairman. The word 사장 is also often used to refer to business owners. So if you want to speak to the owner of a restaurant, you can ask to speak to 사장님. Okay, so that's a general overview of the job titles in Korea. But as times have evolved, Korean companies have also adopted other job titles, and the most common one is 팀장, which means team leader. In Korean companies, if you're addressing a supervisor by their job title, it's important to add 님 at the end. So if you're a 사원 and you want to address your manager, then you have to say 과장님, 부장님, or 차장님, depending on who you're addressing. However, if you're addressing a subordinate, Koreans will add the person's surname in front of the job title. So if you're a 과장, you can address your 대리 by saying 김대리 or 이대리, depending on his or her surname. Now, similar to how students starting the school at the same time are called 동기, new employees joining the company at the same time are also referred to as 동기. And 동기s at workplace tend to refer to each other by adding 씨 at the end of names when they first join the company. In general, we use 씨 to address people who are either of equal level or with those who are below us in the hierarchy. We don't use 씨 when addressing people with seniority. Now, in terms of language used at workplace, it's important to recognize that workplace is a very formal setting. And whenever you speak to your supervisors, you'll need to use the formal form of 존댓말, which means that most of what you say will end in 입니다, 씁니다, and so on. And with those in the same level as you, even if you're close to that person, it's important to use 존댓말, but in its polite form, as you need to be respectful to each other at work. Now, there are certain work environments where language use can be more casual, partly because of the corporate culture, but partly because of the personality of individuals. However, in general, language use at work is quite formal. Now, most of the time in Korea, those higher up in the corporate hierarchy tend to be older than those beneath them. And in the past, Korean companies intentionally only promoted people when they reached a certain age, which would help to avoid any issues that can arise from the conflict between job title and age. However, in modern times, things are changing, and there are people in management roles who are younger than the people they're managing. Now, while this is nothing new to people in other cultures, for many Korean people, this is an extremely uncomfortable situation. And I know many Korean men who would be extremely unhappy to work for an immediate supervisor who is younger than them. So this is a very sensitive situation. Now, this concept of hierarchy being established through positions in organizational structure is very common in Korea. And perhaps one other setting where it's also common is in the army, which is compulsory for all Korean men. However, we won't go into this in too much detail, as I think the army hierarchy based on rank is probably quite similar in most other countries around the world. Okay, so over the last few lessons, we have considered how hierarchy is established in various settings through factors other than age. And in this lesson, we focused on hierarchy in the workplace. In the next lesson, we'll consider how language use changes depending on how familiar with different people. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson we're going to look at the influence of familiarity on language use. Now, before we go into this, it's important to note that children as well as teenagers use 반말 with their peers as soon as they meet. They will of course use 존댓말 if there is an age gap, but among peers they will use 반말 with each other instantly. However, when two adults meet socially, even if there is an age gap, they will start off by using 존댓말. For example, even though I'm 40 years old, if I meet someone who's 30, when I first greet this person, I will use 존댓말. And the same applies if two adults of the same age meet. They will start off by using 존댓말. And the main reason for this is because they don't know each other well. So at the start of a relationship, two adults will use 존댓말. And as the relationship builds and they form close relations, they will transition to using 반말. And how they do this differs depending on whether the two people are of the same age or whether there is an age gap. Let's first consider relationships where two people are of the same age. Imagine that two 30-year-olds meet through a mutual friend. They'll first start off by using 존댓말. But after meeting each other a couple of times, they're familiar with each other, and one of them might say, 우리 말 놓을까? 우리 말 놓을까? Now, we learned earlier that 말 means words or speech, and the verb 놓다 means to let go. So the literal meaning, to let go of speech, doesn't make much sense. But this phrase means to let go of the formality between the two people and start using informal language. And between two people of the same age, either person in the relationship could suggest using informal language. And they could even suggest this when they meet for the first time, and it wouldn't be a problem. However, things change when there is an age gap in the relationship. When two people with an age gap meet, they still start off using 존댓말. And how they transition from using 존댓말 to 반말 depends on how big the age gap is. If the age gap is only a few years, then the older person might start using 반말 after meeting the younger person 2 or 3 times. And the younger person might start using 반말 with the older person maybe after 6th or 7th meeting. But this depends on how close they have gotten and whether the older person is the type of person who would be happy for the younger person to use casual language to them. Now, if the age gap is really big, let's say about 10 years, then even if they become really close, the younger person will likely have to continue using 존댓말. And the older person might use 반말 to the younger person at the second or the third meeting. Quite often, the younger person might say, 말 놓으세요. 말 놓으세요. And we use this sentence to suggest the older person to speak comfortably, and this is a way of being polite to the older person. One other factor to consider is that women tend to transition from formal to informal language much more quickly than men, even if there is an age gap. And in general, men in Korea tend to be more formal than women, which is why almost all men call their parents by the formal words 어머니 and 아버지, while women tend to call their parents by the informal forms 엄마 and 아빠. Final point to note in this lesson is that even if people have formed close relationships, in some relationships the language use has to be formal. For example, in relationships between teachers and students, although teachers can use 반말 to the students, students can never use 반말 to their teachers. Another common example is in the relationship between workers and their supervisors. Depending on the corporate environment, the supervisor might use 반말 to the workers, but workers can never use 반말 to their supervisors. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on familiarity and language use. And the key point to note is that when people meet, they start off using 존댓말. And once they get to know each other, they can transition to using 반말, though how this is done depends on the age gap in the relationship, people's gender, and the nature of their relationship. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time developing our understanding of how hierarchy is established in Korea. In the next unit, we're going to start learning about different kinds of honorific language and how we use them. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi everyone. So in this unit, we're going to learn what honorific language is, how it's used, and we'll also look at how we can address people. In this lesson, we're going to look at the overview of honorific language. Now, as we have learned in the previous unit, because Korea is a hierarchical society, it's very important that we use appropriate language when we speak to people in different levels of hierarchy. In the previous unit, we learned that Korean language can be categorized into 반말 and 존댓말. 반말 is the language we use when we talk to our peers, and 존댓말 is the language we use when we talk to those with seniority. Within 존댓말, there are various layers, and the highest level of 존댓말 is what we call honorific language. Due to the nature of the Korean society, where respect is an integral aspect of how we interact with each other, use of honorific language is very common, and in many situations, it's more common than other forms of 존댓말. Two main forms of honorific language are nouns and verbs. A good example of an honorific noun is the word for name. In Korean, we have the standard word 이름 and an honorific form 성함. And we can use the honorific form when we refer to the name of someone who's higher up in the hierarchy. Now, not all nouns have standard and honorific words, and it's actually limited to certain words. In the resources section, you can find a document with a full list of nouns that have honorific forms. Now, the use of honorific verbs is much more widespread and more common in Korean. Some verbs have an entirely different honorific verbs, and a good example of this is the verb to give. The standard form is 주다, and its honorific form is 드리다. And similar to nouns, only a selection of verbs have a different honorific form. And again, we have a document with a full list of verbs and their honorific forms. However, one difference between nouns and verbs is that all Korean verbs can conjugate into an honorific form by adding 시 to the verbs. And this is something we will look at in detail in this unit. Now, in general, the most important aspect of honorific language is the use of verbs. So over the next few lessons, we'll take a look at the use of verbs in their honorific form in more detail. And in the next lesson, we'll take a look at the overview of Korean verbs. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at the overview of Korean verbs. The infinitive forms of all Korean verbs and descriptive verbs, which function like adjectives, consist of the verb stem and 다. Here are some examples. 알다, to know. 자다, to sleep. 나쁘다, to be bad. 좋다, to be good. The red parts indicate the verb stem. In Korean, we generally use the infinitive forms when we talk about things in a matter-of-fact way. So we often see verbs' infinitive forms used in textbooks, and we generally don't use the infinitive form when we're talking to people. Now, these four verbs can be conjugated into 반말 and 존댓말, and these are the casual form, these are the polite forms, and then we have the formal form. As we learned before, whether we use 반말 or 존댓말 depends on who we're talking to in the hierarchy, the setting of that hierarchy, and the level of familiarity in our relationship. We generally use casual language with our peers or when we're talking down to people. And the polite form is what we use the most in everyday situation. When we meet people for the first time, when we talk to older family members, and when we're out shopping, ordering food in restaurants, or buying tickets at cinema, we can use the polite form. So this is the most commonly used verb form. Lastly, we have the formal form, and we use the formal form in very formal settings. And a good example is the workplace. Okay, so these are the three standard forms of verbs and descriptive verbs and how they're used. However, as mentioned in the previous lecture, as well as these forms, we also have another form of 존댓말, and this is the honorific form. And here are the honorific forms of these verbs. Again, as we learned before, some verbs have a completely different honorific verb, such as 자다 and 주무시다. But many verbs can be conjugated into honorific forms, and these are made by adding either 시 or 의시. Additionally, these honorific forms can be conjugated into casual, polite, and formal forms. The basis of how we use these three forms of honorific verbs is the same as the standard verbs. We will take a look at how we use honorific verbs in more detail later. Okay, so that's a quick overview of different forms of verbs and honorific verbs. Over the next two lessons, we're going to take a look at how we add 시 and 의시 to form honorific verbs. So I'll see you soon again in the next lesson. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson, we're going to learn how verbs are conjugated into honorific forms by adding 의시. Here's the first pattern. If the verb stem ends in a 받침, then we add 의시 to the verb stem. Here are some examples. 찾다, 찾으시다. 섞다, 섞으시다. 닫다, 닫으시다. So as you can see in these examples, when the verb stem ends in a 받침, we add 의시 to the verb stems to form honorific verbs. Now, when we add 의시 to the verb stem, they are considered as part of the verb stem. So they can conjugate into casual, polite, and formal forms in the same way as other verbs where the verb stem ends in the vowel E. For example, the verb 치다 means to hit, and it conjugates into 쳐, 쳐요, and 칩니다. Similarly, these three honorific verbs can be conjugated into their casual, polite, and formal forms in the same way. To form casual verbs, the vowel E changes to 여, and for the polite form, we add 요 at the end. To form the formal form, we change 시다 to 십니다. We will talk more about how we use these different forms of honorific verbs in a couple of lectures. Now, these honorific forms follow the same pattern of conjugation in the past and future tense. So the past tense of 치다 is 쳤어요, and the future tense is 칠 거예요. And these verbs change in the same way. So for the past tense, we have 찾으셨어요, 섞으셨어요, and 닫으셨어요. And for the future tense, we have 찾으실 거예요, 섞으실 거예요, and 닫으실 거예요. Okay, so let's now look at the second pattern. When a verb stem doesn't end in a 받침, we add 시 to the verb stem. Here are some examples. 치다, 치시다. 주다, 주시다. 사다, 사시다. And the way we change these verbs into casual, polite, and formal forms is exactly the same, as the verb stems still end in the vowel E. And these verbs can change into past and future forms in the same way too. One thing to note is that although the verb 주다 has a different honorific verb 드리다, we can still change 주다 to an honorific verb 주시다. We will talk more about how these verbs are used later in the course. Now, these are the two main patterns of adding 의시 to the verb stems to make the verbs into honorific verbs. Do make sure to download the exercise worksheet to practice forming honorific forms following these patterns. Now, there are also other irregular patterns of changing verbs into honorific verbs, so that's what we'll look at in the following lesson. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson, we're going to learn about irregular patterns of adding 의시 to form honorific verb forms. The first irregular pattern is in verbs where the verb stem ends in a 리을 받침. In these verbs, we remove the 리을 받침 and add 시 to the verb stem. Here are some examples. 살다, 사시다. 알다, 아시다. 팔다, 파시다. So as you can see in these examples, we remove the 리을 받침 in the verb stem and then add 시 to the verb stem. And the way these honorific verbs change into casual, polite, and formal forms, as well as past and future tense, is the same as what we saw in the previous lesson. However, there are two exceptions to this pattern. 갈다, 가르시다, 말다, 마르시다. So in these examples, we follow the pattern from the previous lesson where we add 으시 to the verb stems ending in a 받침. Now, there is no real reason for this, but I think it's largely to avoid confusion since 가시다 is an honorific form of 가다 and 마시다 is a verb meaning to drink. So do keep in mind that there are certain exceptions even to irregular patterns. Now, another irregular pattern with honorific verb conjugation is when the verb stem ends in a 비읍 받침. When the verb stem ends in a 비읍 받침, we remove the 비읍 and then add 우시 to the verb stem. Here are two examples. 눕다, 누우시다. 아름답다, 아름다우시다. So as you can see, the 비읍 받침 is removed, and then we add 우시 to the verb stem. Also, the way we change them into different levels of formality and tenses is exactly the same as the verb stem ends in the vowel E. However, as before, there is always an exception to the rule, and one exception to this pattern is in the verb 잡다. The honorific form of 잡다 is 잡으시다. And this follows the same pattern we learned in the previous lesson where we add 으시 to the verb stems ending in a 받침. So this is one exception to this pattern of verb stems ending in 비읍 받침. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on irregular patterns to form honorific verb forms. Please download the worksheet to practice the irregular patterns you have learned in this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to focus on how we use honorific verbs. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to look at the basics of how honorific verb forms are used. And I say the basics because in the next unit, we're going to look at how honorific language is used in specific contexts. But in this lesson, I want to go over the fundamental concept of how honorific language is used. First, we use standard verbs to describe actions of ourselves and others. Here are a few example sentences. 내가 했어. I did it. 내가 했어. 제가 했어요. I did it. 제가 했어요. 진수가 했습니다. 진수 did it. 진수가 했습니다. The first sentence describes my own action using the casual verb. And because it uses the casual form of 하다 in the past tense, we use this sentence when we're talking to our peers or when we're talking down to people. In the second sentence, I describe my own actions using the polite form of 하다 in the past tense. And because it uses the polite form, we use this sentence when we need to be polite and respectful. Lastly, we use the formal form of 하다 in the past tense to describe someone else's action. And because the verb is in formal form, we would use this sentence in formal settings only. So the key point to note is that we can use the standard verb to talk about actions of ourselves and others, and we use different forms of the verb with people in different levels of hierarchy. Now, in terms of honorific verbs, we generally only describe the actions of those who are higher up in the hierarchy. And we still follow the same pattern of using casual, polite, and formal forms with people of different seniority. Here are three example sentences. 아버지가 하셨어. The father did it. 아버지가 하셨어. 어머니가 하셨어요. The mother did it. 어머니가 하셨어요. 부장님이 하셨습니다. The head of department did it. 부장님이 하셨습니다. So in the first sentence, we use the casual form of honorific verb to describe the father's action. And since the honorific verb is in its casual form, we would use this sentence with our peers or when we're talking down to people. The second sentence uses the polite form of the honorific verb to describe the mother's action. And we would use this sentence when we need to be polite and respectful to someone. Lastly, we use the formal form of the honorific verb to describe 부장님, the head of department's action. So this sentence would be used in formal settings like workplace. Okay, so that's the basis of honorific verbs. We use them to describe the actions of those higher up in the hierarchy. And we use casual, polite, and formal forms depending on who we're talking to. The final point to note regarding honorific verbs is that when the verb describes an action directed to those higher up in the hierarchy, then we use honorific verbs to describe the subject's action. Here are two example sentences. 제가 아버지에게 드렸어요. I gave it to my father. 제가 아버지에게 드렸어요. 아버지가 저한테 주셨어요. My father gave it to me. 아버지가 저한테 주셨어요. The first sentence describes me giving something to my father. In this sentence, although we're describing my action, because the action is towards someone higher up in the hierarchy, we use the honorific verb 드리다. However, in the second sentence, although we're describing my father's action, because the action is directed towards me, we use the standard verb, but we use the honorific form of the standard verb, 주시다. So this is how we use the honorific form of the standard verb to describe the actions of someone with seniority when the action is directed at someone lower in the hierarchy. Okay, so that's probably a lot of information to take in, but same as before, do download the exercise worksheet to practice using the honorific verbs appropriately. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how we address people casually in Korean. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to look at how we address people casually in Korean. Now, unlike English, the use of pronouns is far less common in Korean. In many situations, it's common for people to form sentences without pronouns as subjects, as who or what the sentence is about is understood from the context. Moreover, while there are specific informal and formal forms of I and we, there are no universal pronouns we use to refer to he, she, and they. And even the pronoun you, there is only an informal form and not a formal form. So how we address people and how we refer to people differs in Korean. In Korean, you can only address people by their name if they are either your friends or younger than you. You cannot address people by their name if they're older. We'll talk more about addressing people who are older in the next lecture. Now, if you're calling your friend to catch his or her attention, you can add 아 or 야 at the end of names. We add 아 if the name ends in a 받침, and we add 야 if the name doesn't end in a 받침. Here are some examples. 기완아, 기완아, 민영아, 민영아, 민수야, 민수야, 해나야, 해나야. So as you can see, to call someone, if the name ends in a 받침, we add 아 at the end. And if the name doesn't end in a 받침, we add 야 at the end. In sentences, we could say 기완아, 가자. Let's go, 기완. 기완아, 가자. 해나야, 어디야? Where are you, Hannah? 해나야, 어디야? Okay, so that's how we address people by their name. Let's now learn how we can refer to people with their names. When we talk about friends or those younger than us, we add 이 after a name that ends in a 받침, and then add one of the particles. Here are some example sentences. 기완이가 갔어요. 기완 went. 기완이가 갔어요. 기완이는 갔어요. 기완 went. 기완이는 갔어요. So as you can see, we add e after the name that ends in a 받침 before adding either the subject particle 가 or the object particle 는. Now, although we would normally add the particle e and n when the name ends in a 받침, but because of e that comes after the name, which doesn't have a 받침, we use the subject particle 가 and the topic particle 는. On the other hand, if the name doesn't end in a 받침, then we just add the particles. Here are some example sentences. 민수가 갔어요. 민수 went. 민수가 갔어요. 민수는 갔어요. 민수 went. 민수는 갔어요. So this time we don't add e, we just add the subject particle 가 and the topic particle 는. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on addressing people casually by using their names. And we learned to add a or ya when calling people. And we learned how we can refer to people using their names and subject and topic particles. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to address people with seniority. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to look at how we address people respectfully in Korean. Now, how we address people with seniority depends on how we know them. As mentioned in an earlier lecture, at workplace, if the age gap is minor and the other person is of the same level, then we can address them by adding 씨 at the end. The use of 씨 is quite formal, which makes it appropriate to use at workplace. So we can say 기완 씨 and 미나 씨. And we can also use 씨 in social settings when we don't know the other person very well. Another word we often use to address people respectfully is 님, and it's commonly used at the end of job titles. For example, the word 사장 is often used to refer to a business owner. So if you're in a small cafe and you know that someone is the cafe owner, then you can address that person by saying 사장님. Now, addressing people by their job title is one of the most common ways of addressing people in Korea. So we can say things like 선생님, 기사님, and 간호사님. We can also add 님 at the end of certain family titles, and the most common are 형님, 누님, 어머님, and 아버님. The use of 님 with 형 and 누나 reflects how men use formal language more than women, as 언니 and 오빠, which are used by women, are not used with 님. However, although these are family titles, when we address our actual family members, we don't use these terms, mainly because we are so close to them and we don't need to be so respectful by adding 님 at the end. These family titles with 님 at the end are used when we address people outside of the family. For example, if we're addressing our friend's parents, then we can use 어머님 and 아버님. However, do note that this is from an adult's perspective. When children address friends' parents, they will use 아줌마 and 아저씨, which we use to refer to married men and women. Also, when men meet people in social settings, they can refer to older men and older women as 형님 and 누님 to be respectful. Now, this word ending 님 is used when we need to be respectful to people. In general, 님 is not used with names in everyday situations. However, in formal settings, we can use 님 with names. So in hospitals, if the reception wants to call a patient's name out, they might say 김기환님, 김기환님. But in everyday situation, we don't call on people by adding 님 at the end of names. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson, and today we learned various ways of addressing people respectfully in Korean. And we're now going to move on, and in the next unit, we're going to start learning how honorific language is used in specific settings. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to say goodbye in Korean. Now, there are 4 verbs we will focus on in this lesson, and they are 있다 and 계시다 from the previous lesson, and 가다 and 가시다. First, if we're leaving a place, such as someone's house, workplace, or a restaurant, then we say goodbye using the verbs 있다 and 계시다 to wish them a good stay. Here are 2 ways of saying goodbye using the verb 있다. 잘 있어, 잘 있어. 잘 있어요, 잘 있어요. In the previous lesson, we used the past form of 있다, 있었어 to ask how someone has been. However, when we use the present form 있어 and 있어요, we're wishing someone to stay well. So the verb becomes an imperative form, commanding the other person to do something. And these phrases become a way of saying goodbye in Korean. We can use the casual form when we talk to our peers or when we talk down on those below us in the hierarchy. The second sentence that uses the polite form of the verb 있다, 있어요 is generally used when we need to be a little more polite. So if we're saying goodbye to someone younger who we don't know very well, or when we're saying goodbye to those we're familiar with and are higher up in the hierarchy, then we can use this phrase. Now, as we learned in the previous lesson, we can use the honorific verb 계시다 to be more respectful. Using 계시다, we can say 잘 계세요, 잘 계세요. 안녕히 계세요, 안녕히 계세요. Using the polite form of 계시다, 계세요, we can say goodbye using the adverbs 잘, meaning well, or 안녕히, which means comfortably or peacefully. So the literal meaning of these phrases is please stay well or please stay comfortably or peacefully. Now, we don't use the formal form of 계시다, 계십니다 because the casual form and the polite form function as imperative forms, as in they command the other person to do something. However, the formal form does not function as an imperative form, so it's not used to say goodbye in Korean. Now, in terms of usage, these phrases are used when we're talking to those higher up in the hierarchy, but they're also commonly used when we're saying goodbye to those we're not familiar with. And in Korea, if you're ever in doubt, it's always best to be respectful. So this is a very common way of saying goodbye in Korea. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of saying goodbye when the other person is staying. 잘 있어. 잘 있어. 잘 있어요. 잘 있어요. 잘 계세요. 잘 계세요. 안녕히 계세요. 안녕히 계세요. That was great. Well done. Let's now look at how we say goodbye using the verbs 가다 and 가시다, which means to go. We use the verbs 가다 and 가시다 to say goodbye when the other person is leaving a place. Let's first look at 2 ways of saying goodbye using 가다. 잘 가, 잘 가. 잘 가요, 잘 가요. So in the first sentence, we use the adverb 잘, which means well, and the casual form of 가다, 가. So the literal meaning of 잘 가 is go well. And this is how we say goodbye in Korean. As this phrase uses the casual verb 가, this is 반말. So we commonly say this to our friends. The second phrase uses the polite form of 가다, 가요. And we use this when we need to be polite. So we can say this phrase to those who are higher up in the hierarchy or when we're talking to people we're not familiar with. Let's now look at how we use the honorific verb 가시다. 조심히 가세요. 조심히 가세요. 안녕히 가세요. 안녕히 가세요. 조심히 means carefully. And as we learned before, 안녕히 means comfortably or peacefully. So the literal meaning of these phrases is please go carefully or please go comfortably, peacefully. And these two phrases are the two common respectful ways of saying goodbye. We use these phrases when we're saying goodbye to those higher up in the hierarchy, such as older relatives, our teachers, and our supervisors at workplace. Okay, so let's practice these phrases which we use to say goodbye to those leaving a place. 잘 가. 잘 가. 잘 가요. 잘 가요. 조심히 가세요. 조심히 가세요. 안녕히 가세요. 안녕히 가세요. Fantastic effort today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned two different ways of saying goodbye in Korean using the verbs 있다 and 계시다 and 가다 and 가시다. In the next lesson, we're going to look at honorific language we use to talk about names. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to use honorific language to talk about names. First, there are two key words for the noun name. 이름 and 성함. 이름 is the standard word and the honorific form is 성함. When we say this word 성함, the hiat is barely audible. So it's 성함, 성함. Here's how we can ask the other person's name using 이름. 이름이 뭐야? 이름이 뭐야? 이름이 뭐예요? 이름이 뭐예요? The first question is very casual. We use 뭐, meaning what, and the casual form of 이다, 야, which means to be. And if you're an adult, this casual question should only be used when you're talking to young children. Students at primary and secondary schools will often use this question when they meet their peers, as they already know that they are of equal level. The second question uses the polite form of 이다, 예요. And this question can be used by adults when they're asking young adults what their names are. And college students can also ask this question to each other, as college students tend to use slightly more formal language than teenagers. Now, another use of using 이름 is if I'm asking a friend what his friend or girlfriend's name is. In such case, I can ask, 너 여자친구 이름이 뭐야? 너 여자친구 이름이 뭐야? So even though I have never met my friend's girlfriend, since my friend is my peer, she instantly becomes my peer. And I can use casual language to talk about his girlfriend as I'm close to my friend. So you can use 이름 when asking someone's name who's of equal level in the hierarchy. Okay, so let's practice asking these questions. Repeat after me. 이름이 뭐야? 이름이 뭐야? 이름이 뭐예요? 이름이 뭐예요? 너 여자친구 이름이 뭐야? 너 남자친구 이름이 뭐야? That was great. Well done. Let's now look at how we use 성함 to ask what people's names are. Here are two questions. 성함이 어떻게 돼요? 성함이 어떻게 돼요? 성함이 어떻게 되세요? 성함이 어떻게 되세요? The phrase 어떻게 되다 means what is, and it's used in many other questions about personal information, such as asking other person's age, birthday, and phone numbers. The verb 되다 has many different uses, but in this question, it functions like the be verb in English. And in the first question, we use the polite form 돼요, but in the second question, we use the honorific form 되세요. Both of these questions are polite and respectful, But in general, when two adults meet for the first time in Korea, it's more common and appropriate to use the second question, where the verb is in its honorific form. The first question is more appropriate if two people meeting each other know that they are of similar age. Now, we can also use these questions with verbs in casual forms when we're asking our peers for the name of someone higher up in the hierarchy. So if we want to ask our friend's father's name, we can ask 아버지 성함이 어떻게 되셔? 아버지 성함이 어떻게 되셔? So in this question, every word is in its formal or honorific form. 아버지, 성함, and 되시다. Because the question is about my friend's father, who I should be respectful towards. But since I'm asking my friend, I use the casual form of the honorific form, 되시다, 되셔. So the key thing about using casual form of honorific verbs is that we use them when we're talking about those in seniority with our peers. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of these questions. Repeat after me. 성함이 어떻게 돼요? 성함이 어떻게 돼요? 성함이 어떻게 되세요? 성함이 어떻게 되세요? 아버지 성함이 어떻게 되셔? 아버지 성함이 어떻게 되셔? Fantastic job again, well done. Now, when it comes to saying our names, there are several ways to say our names in Korean, and one of them is by using the word 이름. Remember that we use the honorific language to be respectful to the other person, not to ourselves. So we don't use 성함 to talk about our names. So using 이름, we can say 내 이름은 김기환이야. 내 이름은 김기환이야. 제 이름은 김기환이에요. 제 이름은 김기환이에요. 제 이름은 김기환입니다. 제 이름은 김기환입니다. So regardless of whether we're using casual, polite, or formal form of the verb 이다, as we're talking about ourselves, we use 이름. And the verb is also in its standard form, rather than its honorific form, 이시다. And just like other verbs, we use the casual form mainly with our peers, and we mostly use the polite form when we're saying our name to others. The formal form is only used in formal settings. Do remember that the casual form of 이다 can be 이야 if the name ends in a 받침, but if it doesn't, then we just add 야. However, if we're saying what our father's name is, then we use 성함, and we can say 우리 아버지 성함은 김대중이셔. 우리 아버지 성함은 김대중이셔. 저희 아버지 성함은 김대중이세요. 저희 아버지 성함은 김대중이세요. In the first sentence, I use the casual form of the honorific verb 이시다, 이셔. So I use the first sentence to tell my peers what my father's name is. And to talk about my father's name, I use 성함. Also, since I'm talking to my friend, I use 우리, the standard form of our, which can also mean my. On the other hand, we use the second sentence to tell someone of seniority our father's name. So not only do we use 성함, but we also use the formal form of 우리, 저희, and 이세요, which is the polite form of the honorific verb 이시다. We can also use the formal form of 이시다, 이십니다, depending on the context. So do note that if we're talking about our name, we use the noun 이름, but if we're talking about someone we need to be respectful towards, we use 성함 to say what their names are. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these phrases. Repeat after me. 내 이름은 김기환이야. 내 이름은 김기환이야. 제 이름은 김기환이에요. 제 이름은 김기환이에요. 제 이름은 김기환입니다. 제 이름은 김기환입니다. 우리 아버지 성함은 김대중이셔. 우리 아버지 성함은 김대중이셔. 저희 아버지 성함은 김대중이세요. 저희 아버지 성함은 김대중이세요. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we went over the use of standard and honorific words for the noun name, 이름 and 성함, and how to use these terms using the standard and honorific verbs 이다, 이시다, and 되다, 되시다. In the next lesson, we will take a look at the honorific language we use to talk about age. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to use honorific language to talk about age. Now, in general, there are two key words related to age, and they are 살 and 나이. 나이 is the general noun for the word age, and 살 is the counter word for age. But when we ask how old someone is, we can use both of these nouns. When we ask someone's age in a more casual way, we tend to use the word 살. Here are two examples. 몇 살이야? 몇 살이야? 몇 살이에요? 몇 살이에요? So in the first question, we have 몇, and 몇 means how many in questions. Then we use the counter word 살, and it's used with the casual form of the verb 이다, 이야. This question is very casual, and it's commonly used by young people to ask each other's age, and as an adult, you can use this question to ask young children's age. The second question has the same structure, but uses the polite form of 이다, 이에요. So we can use this question if we want to be more polite. Similar to before, university students might use this question when they meet other students for the first time. Just as we had learned in the previous lesson on names, we can also use this structure to ask the age of those who are friends with our friends. For example, if I want to ask how old a friend's girlfriend is, then I can ask, 너 여자친구 몇 살이야? 너 여자친구 몇 살이야? And as before, I can ask this question in a casual way because I'm asking my friend's peer, who also becomes my peer instantly. Okay, so let's first do a speaking practice of these questions. Repeat after me. 몇 살이야? 몇 살이야? 몇 살이에요? 몇 살이에요? 너 여자친구 몇 살이야? 너 남자친구 몇 살이야? That was great. Well done. Now, to ask how old someone is in a more respectful way, we can use the noun 나이. 나이가 어떻게 돼요? 나이가 어떻게 돼요? 나이가 어떻게 되세요? 나이가 어떻게 되세요? Now, if you recall the previous lesson, the question structure is essentially the same. 어떻게 돼요? 되세요 means what is. And the noun in this question is 나이, age. Similar to how we used this question structure in the previous lesson to ask people's names when we first meet them, in general, when two adults meet for the first time, it's more common to ask the second question, which uses the polite form of the honorific verb 되시다, 되세요. The first question might be used if you're fairly sure the other person is of the same age, or if you're sure the other person is much younger than you. Now, if we want to ask our friend's father's age, then we can ask 아버님 나이가 어떻게 되셔? 아버님 나이가 어떻게 되셔? So we address the friend's father with 아버님, which we learned in an earlier lesson. And the rest of the question is the same, except for the verb ending, which is the casual form of the honorific verb 되시다, 되셔. And the reason for using the casual form is because we're talking to our friend. If the person we're speaking to has seniority, then we can use the polite form of the honorific verb. 아버님 나이가 어떻게 되세요? Okay, so in nearly all situations, we can use 나이가 어떻게 되세요 to be polite when asking someone's age. However, when we're talking to someone much older, who's at least 60 years of age, then instead of 나이, we should use 연세 and ask 연세가 어떻게 되세요? 연세가 어떻게 되세요? The noun 연세 is the honorific form of 나이, but it's only used to ask elderly people's age. So unless you're sure that the other person is at least 60, you shouldn't use this word, as some people may be offended by you assuming them to be that old. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of asking these questions. Repeat after me. 나이가 어떻게 돼요? 나이가 어떻게 돼요? 나이가 어떻게 되세요? 나이가 어떻게 되세요? 아버님 나이가 어떻게 되셔? 아버님 나이가 어떻게 되셔? 연세가 어떻게 되세요? 연세가 어떻게 되세요? Great job, well done. Now, to say how old we are, we use the word 살. So we can say 나는 20살이야. 나는 20살이야. 저는 20살이에요. 저는 20살이에요. 저는 20살입니다. 저는 20살입니다. So the first sentence uses the standard form of the pronoun I, 나, and the casual form of the be verb. So we mainly use this sentence with our friends. The second sentence that uses the formal pronoun 저 and the polite form of the verb 이다 is the one that's commonly used when we're talking to those with seniority. And the third sentence that uses the formal form of the verb 이다 is only used in formal settings. When we say our age using 살, we use native Korean numbers. Now, if we want to talk about the age of our elders, then we generally use the noun 세, which also means age. So we can say 저희 할머니는 67세예요. 저희 할머니는 67세예요. 저희 할머니는 67세입니다. 저희 할머니는 67세입니다. Now, depending on who you speak to, you can use either the polite or the formal verb ending. And the other interesting point to note is that unlike 살, we use Sino-Korean numbers with 세. So with 살, we can say 저희 할아버지는 72살입니다. 저희 할아버지는 72살입니다. So with 살, we use native Korean numbers. But with 세, we can say 저희 할아버지는 72세입니다. 저희 할아버지는 72세입니다. So with 세, we use Sino-Korean numbers. So do remember this difference of using different number systems with the nouns 살 and 세. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of talking about age using 살 and 세. Repeat after me. 나는 20살이야. 나는 20살이야. 저는 20살이에요. 저는 20살이에요. 저는 20살입니다. 저는 20살입니다. 저희 할머니는 67세예요. 저희 할머니는 67세예요. 저희 할머니는 67세입니다. 저희 할머니는 67세입니다. Excellent job, well done. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on honorific language related to talking about age. And today we learned various ways of asking and saying our and other people's age. In the next lesson, we're going to learn honorific language related to talking about birthdays. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn honorific language to talk about birthdays. Now there are two key words for birthday. The standard word is 생일 and the honorific form is 생신. Let's first look at how we can ask when someone's birthday is using 생일. 생일이 언제야? 생일이 언제야? 생일이 언제예요? 생일이 언제예요? 생일이 언제세요? 생일이 언제세요? In the first question, we use the standard word 생일. Then we have 언제야. And this is made up of 언제, meaning when, and the casual form of the verb 이다, 야. As with all statements and questions ending in casual form of verbs, we use this question mainly with our friends. The second question uses the polite form of the verb 이다, 예요. And we will use this question when we want to ask our colleagues who we aren't familiar with and those who are a little higher up in the hierarchy. The third question uses the polite form of the honorific verb 이시다, 세요. And we use this question when asking those who are higher up in the hierarchy, such as those who are 5 to 10 years older or senior managers in the corporate hierarchy. However, just as we had learned with age, when we ask the birthday of elderly people, then we should use 생신 and say 생신이 언제세요? 생신이 언제세요? So we change 생일 to 생신 if we want to ask an elderly person's birthday, and we use the polite form of the honorific verb 이시다, 세요. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these ways of asking when someone's birthday is. Repeat after me. 생일이 언제야? 생일이 언제야? 생일이 언제예요? 생일이 언제예요? 생일이 언제세요? 생일이 언제세요? 생신이 언제세요? 생신이 언제세요? That was great. Well done. Now let's consider how we say happy birthday in Korean. In Korean, the standard way of saying happy birthday is to say 생일 축하하다. This combines 생일, meaning birthday, with 축하하다, meaning to congratulate. And this phrase means happy birthday. The verb 축하하다 can be conjugated into three forms. So we can say 생일 축하해, 생일 축하해, 생일 축하해요, 생일 축하해요, 생일 축하합니다, 생일 축하합니다. So we generally use the casual form with our peers or those younger than us, and we use the polite form when we say happy birthday to those a little higher up in the hierarchy and to those who are of similar level but we aren't familiar with. The formal form is used in formal settings. Okay, so let's first practice saying these phrases. Repeat after me. 생일 축하해. 생일 축하해. 생일 축하해요. 생일 축하해요. 생일 축하합니다. 생일 축하합니다. That was great. Well done. Now, there is an honorific form of 축하하다 and it's 축하드리다. 드리다 is the honorific form of 주다, meaning to give. And using this verb, we can say 생일 축하드려요. 생일 축하드려요. 생일 축하드립니다. 생일 축하드립니다. We use the honorific verb 축하드리다 to be more respectful. So if we're saying happy birthday to someone much older, our teachers or people in senior roles at work, then we can say these two sentences. However, other than at very formal settings, it's more common to use the first sentence where the verb ends in a polite form. Finally, if we want to say happy birthday to an elderly person, someone who's at least 60 years of age, then we can say 생신 축하드려요. 생신 축하드려요. 생신 축하드립니다. 생신 축하드립니다. So we can substitute 생일 with 생신. Generally, if you're saying happy birthday to your own grandparents or an elderly person you're familiar with, then you should use the first sentence. But if you're saying happy birthday to someone you don't know, then you can say either phrases. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of these sentences that use the honorific form of 축하하다, 축하드리다. Repeat after me. 생일 축하드려요. 생일 축하드려요. 생일 축하드립니다. 생일 축하드립니다. 생신 축하드려요. 생신 축하드려요. 생신 축하드립니다. 생신 축하드립니다. Great job, well done. Okay, so today we went over many different expressions related to asking when someone's birthday is and wishing someone a happy birthday. In the next lesson, we're going to look at honorific language we use to talk about eating food. So I'll see you soon again in the next lesson. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson, we're going to learn honorific language to talk about eating food. In Korea, it's very common for people to ask one another whether they have eaten or not. And we ask this question almost as a way of greeting each other, particularly around the meal time. So let's first take a look at the casual way of asking if someone has eaten. 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었어요? 밥 먹었어요? In Korean, we use the word 밥, which means cooked rice, to refer to a meal. When we pronounce this word in this sentence, the 비읍 받침 changes to a 미음 sound. So we say 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었어? The verb 먹다, which means to eat, is in the past tense, 먹었다. Now we can use the first question, which uses the casual form of the verb, mainly when we ask our peers. And we can use the second question when we're asking those who are a little higher up in the hierarchy. However, there is an honorific form of the verb 먹다, and it's 들다. and this verb 들다 is mainly used in its honorific form 드시다. So to be more respectful, we can ask 밥 드셨어요? 밥 드셨어요? First, it's important to note that the 비읍 받침 sound is maintained because the following verb 드셨어요 begins with a 디귿 sound. So it's 밥 드셨어요 and not 밤 드셨어요. Now, although this is a more respectful phrase because of the verb 드셨어요, the word 밥 is a rather casual term. So this phrase is more commonly used with older family members who you are close to. And as we will learn shortly, there is a more formal way of asking this question, which is more commonly used than 밥 드셨어요. But before we get to that, let's first do a speaking practice of these questions using 밥. Repeat after me. 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었어요? 밥 먹었어요? 밥 드셨어요? 밥 드셨어요? That was great. Well done. Now, 밥 is the standard way of referring to meals, and the more formal form is 식사. With 식사, however, we don't use the verb 먹다 or the honorific form 드시다. It's always used with the verb 하다, which means to do. So to ask if someone has eaten, we can ask 식사했어요? 식사했어요? 식사하셨어요? 식사하셨어요? In general, because 식사 is quite a formal word, it's more often used with the honorific verb 하셨어요 rather than the standard verb 했어요. However, if we're talking to a colleague who's of the same level but aren't close to at work, then we can use 했어요 rather than 하셨어요. Having said that, there is no definitive guideline on which expression is correct to use, and it all depends on the situation and the person using the language. Personally, I prefer using formal and respectful language in workplace, so unless I'm talking to someone I'm very close to at work, I will ask 식사하셨어요, regardless of the person's age or rank. And much of this is because workplace is a formal setting, and using formal and respectful language at workplace is the norm. One other thing to note is that 식사하다 is a formal language and not an honorific term. So we can use 식사하다 to talk about ourselves eating a meal. Now this differs from other honorific language, which we only use to talk about actions of others. So if a senior manager at workplace asked, 식사했어요? Then we can respond by saying, 네, 식사했습니다. So we can use the same phrase and use either the polite or the formal verb ending in our response. And here I use the formal verb ending as we're talking to a senior manager at workplace. So do keep in mind that we can use the phrase 식사하다 to talk about our own actions. Okay, so let's practice asking these questions using 식사하다. Repeat after me. 식사했어요? 식사했어요? 식사하셨어요? 식사하셨어요? Excellent job, well done. Finally, we have one more formal word for a meal, and it's 진지. Now, 진지 is a formal word, and it's also quite an old term, and it's rarely used in everyday speech, especially by young people. It's more often used by older people. The noun 진지 can be used with either the verb 드시다 or 잡수다. So we can ask, 진지 드셨어요? 진지 드셨어요? 진지 잡수셨어요? 진지 잡수셨어요? So we can use the polite form of either verbs. So far, we've only seen verbs in their polite forms when we ask someone if they've eaten a meal. And this is largely because eating a meal is a fairly casual activity. So even if we're asking people much higher up in the hierarchy, it's more appropriate to ask using the verb's polite form. Now, in terms of usage, as mentioned already, 진지 is more often used by older people. So my aunt in her 50s might ask my grandmother in her 70s if she has eaten by using 진지. Also, it's generally used more with elderly people. So I would use 진지 to my grandparents, but not to senior managers at workplace. However, in the last 10 years, I actually can't remember a time when I used the word 진지. So I think it's a useful word to be aware of, but you can just use 식사 as that's formal enough in all situations. Now, with that being said, let's still do a speaking practice using the word 진지. Repeat after me. 진지 드셨어요? 진지 드셨어요? 진지 잡수셨어요? 진지 잡수셨어요? Excellent effort again, well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we went over various ways of asking someone if they've eaten a meal using the nouns 밥, 식사, and 진지. And we also learned to use various verbs with these nouns. In the next lesson, we're going to look at honorific language we use to talk about sleeping. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn honorific language to talk about sleeping. When we talk about sleep, there are two key verbs. One is the standard verb 자다, and the other is the honorific verb 주무시다. Let's first consider how we say good night using these verbs. Using 자다, we can say 잘 자, 잘 자, 잘 자요, 잘 자요. The word 잘 means well, so the literal translation of these phrases is sleep well or good night. The first phrase 잘 자 uses the casual form of the verb 자다. So this phrase is commonly used with our peers. The second phrase 잘 자요 uses the polite verb ending of 자다, 자요. So this is a more respectful term, and we can use it with those who are slightly above us in the hierarchy and those we are not close to. Now, if we want to say goodnight to those who are much older than us, or to those who are much higher than us in the hierarchy, then we can say 안녕히 주무세요. 안녕히 주무세요. 안녕히, if you recall an earlier lesson, means peacefully or comfortably. And 주무세요 is the polite form of 주무시다. This is the respectful way of saying goodnight. So we can say this to our parents and older relatives. Quite often, people leave out 안녕히 and just say 주무세요, 주무세요. And this is perfectly fine too. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these different ways of saying goodnight. 잘 자, 잘 자, 잘 자요, 잘 자요, 주무세요, 주무세요, 안녕히 주무세요, 안녕히 주무세요. Great job, well done. Now, another way of using 자다 and 주무시다 is to say good morning. Now, Koreans don't say good morning in the same way it is said in English to greet people in the morning time. In modern times, some people do say 좋은 아침, 좋은 아침, which is a literal translation of the English phrase good morning. However, this phrase is not widely used, and Koreans are more likely to just say 안녕하세요 to greet people anytime during the day. However, after a night's sleep, Koreans ask each other whether they have slept well, and they do this using the verbs 자다 and 주무시다. First, using 자다, we can say 잘 잤어? 잘 잤어? 잘 잤어요? 잘 잤어요? Now these phrases literally mean did you sleep well? And the verb 자다 is used in the past tense. 잤어 and 잤어요. We can use the first question that uses the casual form of the verb to ask our peers if they slept well. And we can use the second question with polite verb ending to ask those who are slightly above us in the hierarchy and those we're not familiar with. However, if we need to be more respectful, we can ask 안녕히 주무셨어요? 안녕히 주무셨어요? So with this question, we use the polite and past form of the verb 주무시다, 주무셨어요. And similar to how we just say 주무세요 to say good night, we can also just ask 주무셨어요, 주무셨어요, and that is still a respectful way of asking, did you sleep well? Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of asking, did you sleep well? Using the verbs 자다 and 주무시다. 잘 잤어? 잘 잤어? 잘 잤어요? 잘 잤어요? 주무셨어요? 주무셨어요? 안녕히 주무셨어요? 안녕히 주무셨어요? Great effort today, well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned to say good night and did you sleep well? Using the verb 자다 and its honorific verb 주무시다. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about meeting people. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn honorific language we can use to talk about meeting people. Now, similar to how we can use the verb to see to talk about meeting people, we can also use the Korean verb 보다, which means to see, to talk about meeting people. And the honorific form of 보다 is 뵈다. Do note that the W glide vowel where is pronounced like the vowel 에 in fast speech. So it's 뵈다, 뵈다. Now, when we talk about meeting people who are our peers, then we use the verb 보다. Here are two example sentences using this verb. 나는 내일 수지 볼 거야. 나는 내일 수지 볼 거야. 저는 내일 민수 볼 거예요. 저는 내일 민수 볼 거예요. In these sentences, we combine the verb stem 보 with 을 거다, which means will or be going to. So combining 보다 and 을 거다, 볼 거다 means will see or be going to see. And in the first sentence, the verb phrase is in its casual form. So we would mainly use this sentence with our peers. And as mentioned already, we use the standard verb 보다 because we're talking about meeting Susie, who is my friend. In the second sentence, the verb is in its polite form. So we use this sentence to those we need to be respectful to, such as those higher up in the hierarchy and those who we aren't familiar with. And for this reason, we also use the formal form of the pronoun I, 저. And again, as we're talking about meeting Minzu, who is a friend, we still use the standard verb 보다. We can, of course, use the formal verb ending if we're saying this sentence in a formal setting. Okay, so let's practice these sentences that use 보다 to talk about meeting our peers. Repeat after me. 나는 내일 수지 볼 거야. 나는 내일 수지 볼 거야. 저는 내일 민수 볼 거예요. 저는 내일 민수 볼 거예요. Great job, well done. Now, on the other hand, if we're talking about meeting people who are higher up in the hierarchy, then we use the verb 뵈다. Here are two example sentences. 나는 내일 선생님 뵐 거야. 나는 내일 선생님 뵐 거야. 저는 내일 이모 뵐 거예요. 저는 내일 이모 뵐 거예요. 저는 내일 부장님 뵐 겁니다. 저는 내일 부장님 뵐 겁니다. So in all these sentences, we're talking about seeing those higher up in the hierarchy. The teacher, auntie, and the manager from the company. So we use the verb 뵈다 with 을 거예요. The first sentence uses the casual verb ending, so we would use this sentence mainly with our peers. The second sentence uses the verb's polite form, so we would use this sentence with those higher up in the hierarchy and with those who we aren't familiar with. The last sentence uses the verb's formal form, so we will use this sentence in formal settings only. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of using 뵐 거야, 뵐 거예요, and 뵐 겁니다. Repeat after me. 나는 내일 선생님 뵐 거야. 나는 내일 선생님 뵐 거야. 저는 내일 이모 뵐 거예요. 저는 내일 이모 뵐 거예요. 저는 내일 부장님 뵐 겁니다. 저는 내일 부장님 뵐 겁니다. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned to use the verbs 보다 and 뵈다 to talk about meeting our friends and those higher up in the hierarchy. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about speaking to people. So I'll see you soon in that lesson. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about speaking. Now, in Korean, the noun 말 can be used to mean words, speech, and language, depending on the context it is used in. And to talk about someone speaking or talking, we can combine 말 with the verb 하다, which means to do. So, 말하다 or 말하다 means to speak, talk, or tell. And the honorific form of 말하다 is 말씀하다. 말씀 is the honorific form of 말, and we can add 하다 to 말씀 to form 말씀하다. However, in most situations, we don't just use 말씀하다. We actually change 하다 to its honorific form, 하시다. So it's commonly used as 말씀하시다. So let's first consider sentences using the standard verb 말하다 to talk about someone talking, speaking, and telling. 내가 선생님한테 말했어. 내가 선생님한테 말했어. 제가 민수한테 말했어요. 제가 민수한테 말했어요. In both sentences, I'm describing myself telling someone. So we use the standard form 말하다 and we use the past form 말했어 and 말했어요. And we generally use the standard verb when describing our own actions or actions of our peers and those below us in the hierarchy. Do note that with most verbs where the action is directed to someone, if the action is directed to someone with seniority, we use the honorific verbs to describe our own actions. These verbs include to give, 주다 and 드리다, and to ask, 물어보다 and 여쭤보다. However, with the verb 말하다, we use the standard verb to describe our own actions, regardless of who the action is directed to. So in the first sentence, I use the past and casual form of the verb 말하다, 말했어, to describe me telling my teacher. And as the verb is in its casual form, we mainly use this sentence with our peers. The second sentence uses the past and polite form of the verb 말하다, 말했어요. So we can say this sentence to those higher up in the hierarchy or those we aren't familiar with. Also, we can use the formal form 말했습니다 if the setting is formal. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences. Repeat after me. 내가 선생님한테 말했어. 내가 선생님한테 말했어. 제가 민수한테 말했어요. 제가 민수한테 말했어요. That was great. Well done. Now, if we want to describe someone higher up in the hierarchy doing the talking, we can use 말씀하시다. Here are some example sentences. 할머니가 나한테 말씀하셨어. 할머니가 나한테 말씀하셨어. 교수님께서 저한테 말씀하셨어요. 교수님께서 저한테 말씀하셨어요. 사장님께서 부장님에게 말씀하셨습니다. 사장님께서 부장님에게 말씀하셨습니다. So in the first sentence, we use the honorific verb 말씀하시다 to talk about my grandmother doing the talking. But the verb form is in its casual form, so we can use this sentence to our peers. The second sentence also uses the honorific verb 말씀하시다, but this time the verb is in its polite form. So we would use this sentence to tell someone with seniority or someone we're not close to that the teacher spoke to me. This sentence also uses the particle gezer, and gezer is an honorific subject particle, and we can use this instead of the regular subject particles 이 and 가 to refer to people with seniority. It's actually perfectly fine to use the subject particles 이 and 가 in nearly all situations. But in certain formal situations, such as at workplace or when referring to someone higher up in the hierarchy, such as professors, it's more appropriate to use gezer. The final sentence uses the formal form of the honorific verb 말씀하시다, 말씀하셨습니다. So we will use this sentence in formal settings. And because this sentence is used in formal settings, it's more appropriate to use gezer than the regular subject particle 이. Additionally, we use the particle 에게 instead of 한테, and this is because 에게 is more formal than 한테. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of using the honorific verb 말씀하시다. Repeat after me. 할머니가 나한테 말씀하셨어. 할머니가 나한테 말씀하셨어. 교수님께서 저한테 말씀하셨어요. 교수님께서 저한테 말씀하셨어요. 사장님께서 부장님에게 말씀하셨습니다. 사장님께서 부장님에게 말씀하셨습니다. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned to describe people talking using 말하다 and its honorific verb 말씀하다. We also learned that we further conjugate this verb into its honorific form 말씀하시다. Additionally, we learned to use the honorific subject particle gezer. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about asking questions. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about asking questions. Now, the standard verb to ask is 묻다, and the honorific form is 여쭈다. However, when we use these verbs in sentences, we often combine these verbs with 보다, which means to try doing something. In essence, these four verbs have the same meaning, but the combined forms are less direct than 묻다 and 여쭈다, so they're more commonly used in everyday situations. Now, honorific verbs are used to describe the actions of those above us in the hierarchy, and we use standard verbs to describe our own actions. However, as mentioned in the previous lecture, with the verbs such as 물어보다 and 여쭤보다, the focus is more on the person the action is directed towards. So to describe our actions towards people with seniority, we use the honorific verb. And to describe our actions towards our peers or those below us in the hierarchy, we use the standard verb. There are also situations where we use the honorific form of 물어보다, 물어보시다, and we'll learn this in today's lesson also. So let's first look at some sentences that use the verbs 물어보다 and 물어보시다. 선생님께서 나한테 물어보셨어. 선생님께서 나한테 물어보셨어. 제가 민수한테 물어봤어요. 제가 민수한테 물어봤어요. 부장님께서 저한테 물어보셨습니다. 부장님께서 저한테 물어보셨습니다. So in each sentence, the person asking the question is asking to someone lower in the hierarchy or to someone of the same level as in the second sentence. So we use either the standard verb 물어보다 or its honorific form 물어보시다. The first sentence uses the casual form of the verb, so we can use this sentence to our peers. However, the verb is the honorific form of 물어보다, 물어보시다. And this is because we're describing the action of someone higher up in the hierarchy. So we can use the honorific form to be more respectful. Whether you use 물어보다 or 물어보시다 depends on whose action you're describing and whether you need to be more respectful in that situation. The second sentence uses the polite form of the verb. So we use this sentence to those higher up in the hierarchy or to those we're not familiar with. And because we're describing my own action, we use the standard verb 물어보다. With regards to pronunciation, the W glide vowel wa in 봤어요 is weakened, and it sounds like a. So this is pronounced 봤어요, 봤어요, 물어봤어요, 물어봤어요. Lastly, the final sentence uses the formal form of the verb, so this sentence is used in formal settings. And again, we use the honorific verb 물어보시다 because we're describing a senior manager from work asking questions. Okay, so with that in mind, let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences. Repeat after me. 선생님께서 나한테 물어보셨어. 선생님께서 나한테 물어보셨어. 제가 민수한테 물어봤어요. 제가 민수한테 물어봤어요. 부장님께서 저한테 물어보셨습니다. 부장님께서 저한테 물어보셨습니다. Excellent job, well done. Let's now look at how we use the honorific form 여쭤보다. Here are some example sentences. 내가 선생님께 여쭤봤어. 내가 선생님께 여쭤봤어. 제가 아버님께 여쭤봤어요. 제가 아버님께 여쭤봤어요. 제가 사장님께 여쭤봤습니다. 제가 사장님께 여쭤봤습니다. In each of these sentences, I am asking someone higher up in the hierarchy. Therefore, we describe my actions using the honorific verb 여쭤보다 in the past tense. The first sentence uses the casual form of the verb, so we use this sentence mainly with our peers. The second sentence uses the polite form of the verb. So we use this with those higher up in the hierarchy or with those we're not familiar with. The final sentence uses the formal form of the verb. So we use this sentence in formal settings. Now there's an additional element to this sentence, and it's the particle 게. When we talk about asking a question to someone, we have to use a particle that means to in Korean. And common particles we use are 에게 and 한테. Generally, 에게 is more formal than 한테, so we can use 에게 in these sentences. However, there is an honorific form of these particles, and that's 게. So if you need to be more formal and respectful, you can use 게 instead of 에게 to refer to those higher up in the hierarchy. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences. Repeat after me. 내가 선생님께 여쭤봤어. 내가 선생님께 여쭤봤어. 제가 아버님께 여쭤봤어요. 제가 아버님께 여쭤봤어요. 제가 사장님께 여쭤봤습니다. 제가 사장님께 여쭤봤습니다. Great effort today, well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned to use the verbs 물어보다 and 여쭤보다 to talk about asking questions. We also looked at the use of the honorific particle 게, which means to in English. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about giving something to someone. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about giving something to someone. The standard verb for to give is 주다, and the honorific form is 드리다. And similar to the verbs we learned in the previous lesson, we use the standard verb when we talk about giving something to someone of the same level or those below us in the hierarchy. And we use the honorific verb when we talk about giving something to someone higher up in the hierarchy. Also, just like in the previous lesson, the standard verb 주다 can be used in the honorific form 주시다 to be respectful when describing actions of those higher up in the hierarchy. So let's first look at some example sentences that use 주다 and 주시다. 민수가 나한테 줬어. 민수가 나한테 줬어. 선생님이 저한테 주셨어요. 선생님이 저한테 주셨어요. 아버지께서 저한테 주셨습니다. 아버지께서 저한테 주셨습니다. So in all these sentences, we're talking about giving something to someone of the same level or to someone lower in the hierarchy. So we use either 주다 or 주시다. In the first sentence, I am talking about 민수, who is my peer, giving something to me. So I use the verb 주다. And because the verb is in its casual form, this sentence is mainly used with our peers. Now, in terms of pronunciation, the W glide vowel 워 is weakened and sounds like 어. So this verb is pronounced 줬어요, 줬어요. In the second sentence, we're talking about the teacher giving something to me. And since the teacher is someone I should be respectful to, we use the honorific verb 주시다. And the verb is in the polite form. So we will use this sentence to those higher up in the hierarchy or to those we're not close to. Lastly, in the final sentence, we're talking about my father giving something to me. So we also use the honorific form 주시다. And this time we use the particle 깨서, which makes this sentence more formal and respectful. And the verb is in its formal form, which means this sentence is mainly used in formal settings, such as at workplace. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences that use the verbs 주다 and 주시다. Repeat after me. 민수가 나한테 줬어. 민수가 나한테 줬어. 선생님이 저한테 주셨어요. 선생님이 저한테 주셨어요. 아버지께서 저한테 주셨습니다. 아버지께서 저한테 주셨습니다. That was great. Well done. Let's now look at how we use the verb 드리다 to talk about giving something to someone higher up in the hierarchy. 내가 선생님에게 드렸어. 내가 선생님에게 드렸어. 제가 어머님께 드렸어요. 제가 어머님께 드렸어요. 제가 사장님께 드렸습니다. 제가 사장님께 드렸습니다. So in all these sentences, we use the verb 드리다 because we're talking about me giving something to people higher up in the hierarchy. The teacher, my mother-in-law, and the CEO of the company. And as we have learned many times already, we use the casual form of the verb in the first sentence if we're talking to our peers, and we use the polite form of the verb in the second sentence if we're talking to those higher up in the hierarchy or to those we're not close to. And lastly, the formal form of the verb is used if we're speaking in formal settings. Also, we can use the particle 에게 in the first sentence, which is more formal than 한테, or we can use 게, which is the honorific form of 에게 and 한테. In sentences where the verb is in its polite and formal form, the use of 게 is more appropriate. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of using the verb 드리다. Repeat after me. 내가 선생님에게 드렸어. 내가 선생님에게 드렸어. 제가 어머님께 드렸어요. 제가 어머님께 드렸어요. 제가 사장님께 드렸습니다. 제가 사장님께 드렸습니다. Great job today. Well done. Now, one other point to note regarding the verbs 주다 and 드리다 is that they are commonly combined with other verbs to talk about doing something to or for someone. And the way we use 주다 and 드리다, depending on whom the action is directed to, is exactly the same. Some examples of these combinations include 보여주다, 보여드리다, 해주다, 해드리다, 가져다 주다, 가져다 드리다, and 읽어주다, 읽어드리다. And as we have seen in this lesson, we can also conjugate these standard verbs into honorific forms by adding 시. So do keep in mind that as well as using them individually, 주다 and 드리다 are frequently used by combining with other verbs. Okay, so that's it for this lesson on the use of verbs 주다 and 드리다 to talk about giving something to someone. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific verbs we can use to talk about being ill. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about feeling unwell. Now, the standard verb we use to talk about feeling unwell or being in pain is 아프다. And we can conjugate this verb into its honorific form, 아프시다. The honorific verb of 아프다 is 편찮다. But when we use this verb, we generally use its honorific form, 편찮으시다. Okay, so let's first look at how we ask where someone is feeling pain. Here are two example questions using the verb 아프다. 어디가 아파? 어디가 아파? 어디가 아파요? 어디가 아파요? Now, the two questions look very similar. We use 어디, meaning where, and the subject particle 가. And we use the casual form of the verb 아프다 in the first question, 아파, while the second question uses the polite form 아파요. So we use the first question with our peers, while the second question is used with those who we need to be more polite to. However, as we will see shortly, when we need to be respectful, the use of the honorific verb 아프시다 is more common. So using the polite form of 아프다, 아파요 is more appropriate when we're talking to those who we aren't close to, but are of the same level, or those below us in the hierarchy. Now, to ask the same question to those higher up in the hierarchy, we can use the verbs 아프시다 and 편찮으시다. Here are two example questions. 어디가 아프세요? 어디가 아프세요? 어디가 편찮으세요? 어디가 편찮으세요? In the first question, we use the polite form of the honorific verb 아프다, 아프시다. And when we're talking to those higher up in the hierarchy and to those we're not close to, we generally use this question. The final question that uses the polite form of the honorific verb 편찮으시다 is generally used when we have to be extra respectful. So I would only use this question when talking to my parents-in-law or elderly people. Okay, so with that in mind, let's now do a speaking practice of these questions. Repeat after me. 어디가 아파? 어디가 아파? 어디가 아파요? 어디가 아파요? 어디가 아프세요? 어디가 아프세요? 어디가 편찮으세요? 어디가 편찮으세요? Excellent job, well done. Let's now consider how we answer these questions. Now, when we're talking about ourselves or those below us in the hierarchy being ill, we use the verb 아프다. But if we're talking about those higher up in the hierarchy being ill, we use the verbs 아프시다 or 편찮으시다. Here are two example sentences using the verb 아프다. 나는 머리가 아파. 나는 머리가 아파. 저는 다리가 아파요. 저는 다리가 아파요. With the verb 아프다, we can first specify where the pain is and then use the verb 아프다. The first sentence is what we can say to our friends as it uses the casual form of the verb 아프다, 아파. And here body means head. So this sentence means I have a headache. The second sentence uses a polite form of the verb. So we can use this sentence with those higher up in the hierarchy or those we're not close to. 다리 means leg. So this sentence means I have a leg ache or my leg hurts. Let's now look at sentences that use the verbs 아프시다 and 편찮으시다 to talk about those higher up in the hierarchy being ill. Here are two example sentences. 아버지는 배가 아프셔. 아버지는 배가 아프셔. 선생님은 편찮으세요. 선생님은 편찮으세요. So in the first sentence, we're talking about my father being ill. So we use the honorific form of 아프다, 아프시다. However, the verb is in its casual form, so we will use this sentence with our peers. 배 means stomach. So this sentence means I have a stomachache or I have pain in my stomach. The last sentence talks about the teacher being unwell. So we use the honorific verb 편찮으시다. And we use the polite form of the honorific verb 편찮으시다, 편찮으세요. So we can use this sentence with those above us in the hierarchy and those we're not close to. Also, this sentence describes the teacher being unwell in a more general sense rather than a specific body part. And this is a key difference between 아프다 and 편찮다. While 아프다 or 아프시다 can be used to specify where in the body the person is in pain, 편찮다 and 편찮으시다 is more commonly used to talk about being unwell generally. So when it comes to usage, both 아프시다 and 편찮으시다 are commonly used, but they're used differently depending on what you want to describe. Also, do keep in mind that there are other ways of describing someone being unwell. So these two verbs aren't the only verbs used to describe someone being unwell in Korean. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences. Repeat after me. 나는 머리가 아파. 나는 머리가 아파. 저는 다리가 아파요. 저는 다리가 아파요. 아버지는 배가 아프셔. 아버지는 배가 아프셔. 선생님은 편찮으세요. 선생님은 편찮으세요. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned to use the verbs 아프다 and 편찮다 to talk about being unwell. And we also learned the use of the honorific forms 아프시다 and 편찮으시다. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we use to talk about other people's children. See you then. Bye-bye. Hi there. So in this lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about children in families. When we talk about our children or other people's children, there are two key nouns. The standard noun is 아이 and the honorific noun is 자녀. The word 아이 has the same meaning as the English word children, so we can use it to refer to children in a general way, or people's children. The honorific word 자녀 is only used to refer to people's children. It's not used to refer to children in a general sense. Okay, so using 아이 and 자녀, let's take a look at how we ask people whether they have kids or not. Here are two example questions using 아이. 아이가 있어? 아이가 있어? 아이가 있어요? 아이가 있어요? First, if you recall an earlier lesson on saying how are you, we learned that the verb 있다 has many different uses and it can be used to mean to stay. However, another common use of 있다 is to mean to have. So in the first sentence, we use the standard word for children, 아이, to ask if the other person has children, and we use the casual form of the verb 있다, 있어. So we mainly use this question when talking to our peers. In the second question, we use the standard word for children, 아이, and the polite form of the verb 있다, 있어요. And we would generally ask this question to those who are of a similar level but aren't close to us. Now, at this point, it's important to note that even though 아이 is the standard word, it's not an impolite word. So even if you've just met someone who's a few years older, it's perfectly fine to ask this question. Though, as we will learn shortly, if you're speaking to someone much higher in the hierarchy, you will need to use the honorific word 자녀. Okay, so let's now take a look at two example questions using 자녀. 자녀가 있어요? 자녀가 있어요? 자녀가 있으세요? 자녀가 있으세요? So in both questions, we use 자녀, and we use 자녀 when we're referring to the children of someone much higher in the hierarchy. In the first question, the verb 있다 is used in its polite form. So we can use this question if we're speaking to someone higher in the hierarchy. The second question uses the polite form of the honorific verb 있으시다, 있으세요. So this question is more respectful than the first question. When it comes to usage, I would more often use the second question that uses the honorific verb 있으세요. And the reason is because if I'm using the word 자녀, then I'm likely speaking to someone who I need to be respectful to. So it's more appropriate to use the honorific verb than the standard verb. So the second question is more commonly used than the first question when we need to be respectful. Now, there is an even more honorific word than 자녀, and that's 자제. But when we ask if someone has children, the use of 자녀 is more common than 자제 in Korean. Okay, so let's now practice these questions to ask if the other person has children. Repeat after me. 아이가 있어? 아이가 있어? 아이가 있어요? 아이가 있어요? 자녀가 있어요? 자녀가 있어요? 자녀가 있으세요? 자녀가 있으세요? That was great. Well done. Now, let's say that your professor tells you that he has a daughter and a son who are both at secondary school. So you want to ask what year they are in. The words for daughter and son in Korean are 딸 and 아들. But when referring to sons and daughters of those higher up in the hierarchy, we add 님 to these nouns. So 딸 becomes 따님 and 아들 becomes 아드님. Using these nouns to ask what year the children are in, we can ask 따님은 몇 학년이에요? 따님은 몇 학년이에요? 아드님은 몇 학년이에요? 아드님은 몇 학년이에요? 몇, as we learned before, can be used to mean how many, but it can also be used to mean what. And 학년 is school year, and 이에요 is the polite form of the verb 이다, which is similar to the be verb in English. So 몇 학년이에요 means what year are you in? And in front of this question, we can add 따님은 or 아드님은 to ask what year the professor's daughter and son are in. If you're asking someone who's of similar level or maybe slightly above you in the hierarchy, then you can just use 딸 and 아들 instead of 따님 and 아드님, as that becomes too formal. Okay, so let's do a speaking practice of these questions that use the nouns 따님 and 아드님. Repeat after me. 따님은 몇 학년이에요? 따님은 몇 학년이에요? 아드님은 몇 학년이에요? 아드님은 몇 학년이에요? Great job today. Well done. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned to use the nouns 아이 and 자녀 to refer to people's children. And we also learned to refer to people's sons and daughters respectfully by using 따님 and 아드님. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about taking someone to a particular place. See you soon again. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about taking someone to a particular place. Now, the verbs we're going to learn today are used to describe escorting someone to a particular destination. So if you're taking your mother to the airport or you're taking your children to a birthday party, you would use these verbs. There are two verbs we use to talk about taking someone to a place. The standard verb is 데려다 주다 and the honorific verb is 모셔다 드리다. The standard verb combines 데리다, which means to keep people and animals close, with the verb ending 어 주다, which, as we mentioned in an earlier lesson, means to do something for someone. And this combined form means to escort someone to a particular place. The honorific form combines 모시다, which means to take someone to some place, with the honorific form of 어 주다, 어 드리다. And the combined form is the honorific form of 데려다 주다, 모셔다 드리다. Now, similar to how we use the verbs 주다 and 드리다, we use 데려다 주다 when the action is directed to those of the same level or below us in the hierarchy. And we use 모셔다 드리다 when the action is directed to those higher up in the hierarchy. Let's first take a look at some sentences that use 데려다 주다. 내가 수지를 데려다 줬어. 내가 수지를 데려다 줬어. 형이 저를 데려다 줬어요. 형이 저를 데려다 줬어요. 아버지가 저를 데려다 주셨어요. 아버지가 저를 데려다 주셨어요. In these sentences, the action is directed to either someone of the same level, as in the first sentence, or someone below, as in the second and the third sentence. So we use the verbs 데려다 주다, or as in the third sentence, its honorific form, 데려다 주시다. The first sentence uses the casual form of the verb, as well as the standard form of the pronoun I, 나. So we will use this sentence mainly with our peers. The second sentence uses the polite form of the verb and the formal form of the pronoun I. So we will use this sentence when speaking to those higher up in the hierarchy or those we're not familiar with. Now, 주다 in 데려다 주다 should never be changed to 드리다. However, if we want to talk about someone higher up in the hierarchy, taking someone to a particular place, we can change 주다 to its honorific form, 주시다. So, as you can see in the third sentence, to talk about my father, who is higher than me in the hierarchy, taking me somewhere, I use the honorific form 데려다 주시다. This sentence uses the polite form of the verb, so it's used with those higher up in the hierarchy and with those we're not familiar with. We can also use the formal form of the verb in formal situations. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences that use the verbs 데려다 주다 and 데려다 주시다. Repeat after me. 내가 수지를 데려다 줬어. 내가 수지를 데려다 줬어. 형이 저를 데려다 줬어요. 형이 저를 데려다 줬어요. 아버지가 저를 데려다 주셨어요. 아버지가 저를 데려다 주셨어요. Excellent job, well done. Let's now look at how we use 모셔다 드리다. As mentioned before, we use 모셔다 드리다 when the action is directed to someone higher up in the hierarchy. Here are some example sentences. 내가 어머니를 모셔다 드렸어. 내가 어머니를 모셔다 드렸어. 제가 이모를 모셔다 드렸어요. 제가 이모를 모셔다 드렸어요. 제가 어머님을 모셔다 드렸습니다. 제가 어머님을 모셔다 드렸습니다. So in each of these sentences, we're talking about me taking someone higher up in the hierarchy to a particular place. So we use the honorific verb 모셔다 드리다. The first sentence uses the verb's casual form, so it's mainly used with our peers. The second sentence uses the verb's polite form, so it's used with those higher up in the hierarchy and with those we're not familiar with. Lastly, the third sentence uses the verb's formal form, so we use this sentence in formal settings. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences that use the honorific verb 모셔다 드리다. 내가 어머니를 모셔다 드렸어. 내가 어머니를 모셔다 드렸어. 제가 이모를 모셔다 드렸어요. 제가 이모를 모셔다 드렸어요. 제가 어머님을 모셔다 드렸습니다. 제가 어머님을 모셔다 드렸습니다. Excellent job today. Well done. Okay, so today we learned to use the verbs 데려다 주다 and 모셔다 드리다 to talk about escorting someone to a particular place. And we also learned that we can change 데려다 주다 to its honorific form, 데려다 주시다. The next lesson is our last lesson on honorific language, and it's a bit of a dark topic, but we'll be going over the language we use to talk about people dying. So I'll see you soon again in that lesson. Bye-bye. Hi there, so in this lesson we're going to learn the honorific language we can use to talk about people dying. Now, in Korean, there are many different verbs we can use to talk about people dying, and each one has specific uses. In this lesson, we'll focus on these 4 verbs. Let's first consider these 2 verbs, 죽다 and 사망하다. The most common verb we use to talk about someone dying in Korean is 죽다. 죽다 is neither a formal nor an informal word, but 죽다 is very direct and it's not a respectful word, so it's not used to talk about the death of those higher up in the hierarchy. We mainly use 죽다 to talk about our peers or those younger than us dying. We can also use it to talk about people dying from tragic events. Here are 2 example sentences. 수지 동생이 죽었어. 수지 동생이 죽었어. 차 사고로 5명이 죽었어요. 차 사고로 5명이 죽었어요. So in the first sentence, because we're talking about the death of Susie's younger sibling, who is below us in the hierarchy, we use the verb 죽다 in the past tense. In the second sentence, to talk about a current event where people have died, we can use the verb 죽다 to say how many people have died in that event. In terms of formality, same as with other verbs, the first sentence uses the verb's casual form, so we use this sentence with our peers mainly. And the second sentence uses the verb's polite form, so we use this sentence with those higher up in the hierarchy, and with those we're not familiar with. We can also use the verb's formal form in formal situations. Last point to note is that the verb 죽다 is also used to talk about the death of animals. And if you're a fan of video games, you can use 죽다 to talk about characters in computer games dying. Now, the verb 사망하다 is made up of the noun 사망, which means death, and the verb 하다, which means to do. This verb is more formal than 죽다, and it comes across a little less direct. However, 사망하다 is never used to talk about people's death in everyday situations. Instead, it's mainly used in formal situations to talk about people's death, such as in the news. Here are 2 example phrases. 사망자 15명. 사망자 15명. 차 사고로 5명이 사망했습니다. 차 사고로 5명이 사망했습니다. To report how many people have died, the noun 사망 is combined with the suffix 차, which refers to people. So 사망자 means a dead person or the dead. The second phrase is what a newsreader might say to report how many people have died from a car accident. Newsreaders always use formal language, so the verb is used in its formal form. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of using the verbs 죽다 and 사망하다. Repeat after me. 수지 동생이 죽었어. 수지 동생이 죽었어. 차 사고로 5명이 죽었어요. 차 사고로 5명이 죽었어요. 사망자 15명. 사망자 15명. 차 사고로 5명이 사망했습니다. 차 사고로 5명이 사망했습니다. Excellent job, well done. Let's now look at two honorific verbs we use to talk about people dying, and they are 돌아가시다 and 별세하다. Both of these verbs are respectful ways of talking about someone's death, but 별세하다 is more formal and less commonly used. Let's first take a look at two sentences using 돌아가시다. 민수의 할아버지가 돌아가셨어. 민수의 할아버지가 돌아가셨어. 제 삼촌이 돌아가셨어요. 제 삼촌이 돌아가셨어요. As mentioned already, 돌아가시다 is more commonly used in everyday situations, and we use this verb to talk about the death of someone higher up in the hierarchy. And one of the distinctions between these verbs is that 돌아가시다 can be used to describe the death of those close to us and not close to us. However, 별세하다 is only ever used to describe the death of those not close to us. Now, in terms of the verb's formality, the first sentence uses the verb's casual form, so we will use this sentence with our peers mainly. And the second sentence uses the verb's polite form, so we will use this sentence with those higher up in the hierarchy and with those we're not familiar with. We can also use the verb's formal form in formal situations. Now, the verb 별세하다 is made up of the noun 별세, which is a formal word that means death, and the verb 하다, which means to do. 별세하다, however, is almost always used in its honorific form, 별세하시다. Similar to 돌아가시다, we use 별세하시다 to talk about the death of those higher up in the hierarchy. But as mentioned already, we mainly use 별세하시다 to talk about the death of people we aren't close to. Additionally, 별세하시다 is mainly used in formal settings, such as in the news or at funerals. Here are two example sentences. 전 대통령이 별세하셨습니다. 전 대통령이 별세하셨습니다. 사장님이 별세하셨습니다. 사장님이 별세하셨습니다. So, in the first sentence, to talk about the death of the previous president, we use the verb 별세하시다 in formal form 별세하셨습니다. And this sentence could be said by a newsreader. The second sentence talks about the death of the company's CEO. So we use 별세하시다 in its formal form, 별세하셨습니다. This sentence might be used in a company announcement to let everyone know of the CEO's passing. Okay, so let's now do a speaking practice of these sentences that use 돌아가시다 and 별세하시다. Repeat after me. 민수의 할아버지가 돌아가셨어. 민수의 할아버지가 돌아가셨어. 제 삼촌이 돌아가셨어요. 제 삼촌이 돌아가셨어요. 전 대통령이 별세하셨습니다. 전 대통령이 별세하셨습니다. 사장님이 별세하셨습니다. 사장님이 별세하셨습니다. Fantastic job today, well done. Okay, so today we learned 4 different verbs we can use to talk about people dying. And they were 죽다, 사망하다, 돌아가시다, and 별세하다, which is mainly used in its honorific form, 별세하시다. So this was the last lesson on honorific language used in different settings. I hope these lessons focused on specific settings has given you a clear idea of how honorific language is used in Korean. We have one final lesson for our farewell, so I'll see you one last time in the next video. See you then. Bye bye.